go to
like
the
a true poser. I'm going to move this back because it looks unrealistically.
I think you need to hang a picture of like Grace Jones off or somebody, like, you know, so you can really just put it forward that, you know, you're the man, and no one's gonna mess with you.
This wasn't actually deliberate, but when I saw it in the screen, I thought, oh,
yeah, that's not bad. Okay, videos, live. Why isn't it? Okay, you're supposed to be streaming now, baby. Where are you?
It's all good. I'm getting the last of the blood out. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Maybe just like give me like a good squeeze or something. I know that's like usually a good bit of toilet paper does the trick, but
normally I've never done this. Of course, I've cut myself while shaving, but not my actual nose. It's just bizarre.
It is kind of funny. I've done that, and like when I was when I was younger, I like when I was a teenager, I do you know what they call baby hairs? You know, it's a very fine hairs there, and like it's very ornately styled by women and stuff. Not so much a 15-year-old kid in the 80s. And my hairline's already been pretty high, but I was really bothered by these because I'm vain, and so I shaved them, and then I managed to put a good size cut, about 2 inches wide, in my forehead. So I'm walking around with a cut in my skull, and people are like, Terhune, what's that? Your lobotomy scar? And I'm like, I'm never gonna shave again. Laughing at me.
That was in a fight.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, you should see the other guy, you jerks. All right, so where is this? Yeah, so we're streaming. It's live. I mean, it should be fine. There you are. Okay. Now, but it's weird because it's not going out. I don't see it on YouTube. But let's go to our content tab, and then live, and then okay. It appears to be. But it's weird because it's not going. Oh, there it is. I hear myself. I hear you. Great.
Miracle.
Okay, good. All right. So let me send you the link for this.
Should I spam it everywhere?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's just we'll kind of bullshit for a little while, and then let's just see what goes on. So yeah, I sent it to you on the what do you call it on YouTube?
Oh, cool.
Oh no, sorry, on
Facebook.
Yeah, thank you, Messenger. Okay.
I keep leaving my Facebook open and offending people by not. I'm just gonna write it on my.
It's hard to be popular, isn't it?
I'm gonna share it now.
Yeah.
I love the picture.
Isn't it? I thought you might like that. Wait, let me go back to that just so. Yeah, there you go.
Should I call you Cathode Ray Tube?
Yeah, sure. You can call me Chang, aka Cathode Ray Tube. That's fine.
I'm having a conversation.
There you go. Why isn't it going back to? Right, so I'm gonna stop the stream. Oh, wait a second. Oh, you know what? We can leave it open, so I'm not gonna fuck with anything, and people, what I'll do is I'll just.
I posted it on Mastodon now.
Yeah, I'll do that too. I'm doing it. What the heck?
Okay, how do I? Okay, open Mastodon is full of AI controversial. Okay, never mind. We're gonna regret this, Charles.
Oh, I hope not. I mean, hope so. No.
I've just posted it. No,
I'm gonna do and
what do you tag me?
Yeah, I'm tagging you, and I'm just. I just did live chat. Robert Logan, Cathode Ray Tube, and.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let's do this.
I'll reshare yours actually, and I'll do the trick.
There you go. And then boop.
Let's hope my nose doesn't start
Now, Robert,
producing some
I think
constant
what you need to
blood.
do is mid talk, you need to just flick it so it's just streaming blood off the corner of the screen. So you're just like, yeah. So anyway, yeah. So brutalist. Let me tell you. No. All right.
Wait until my volume so I can actually hear properly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I think I'll go back to YouTube. Yeah, we're good. Okay. There's the ladness. You know what? I'm just gonna tidy this so that the app screen doesn't show quite all the controls of.
Sorry, that image you've made is.
Isn't that good? I really like that. I was like, you know, that's how I know I'm just like I function best for ADHD because with ADHD because I do stuff like that at the last minute and it's usually pretty damn hilarious. So I like to think that that's what that's what folks want to see. All right, so that's you and that's
It's
screen
excellent.
capture. So it's going. So but Zoom. Now how do we split it in Zoom so that people see you and I? Not just oh wait or no it's multi-speaker there we go.
Are they getting both? I hope so. I don't want them just to be staring at me the whole
If
time.
you switch oh yeah no because I'm sending it so it's going all through mine. God, my hair, I'm glad I didn't even try to style it or anything. Which now just for veracity, which hat do you think I should go with? Should I go with the fierce Maine local with the shape of Maine and then the kiss, or the the
Oh,
Western
come on.
the Western American idiot.
That's not because you're an idiot, but we have to go with that. That's too
I
good.
love that hat. I actually have. I went to. Oh yeah. Steve Roach is in Tucson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to Tucson years ago, and I bought a beautiful Stetson, and I have it upstairs actually, and it's just so gorgeous. But I left it in here. But this one was like I don't know, $13 from another place. But
I like
it's
it.
also hot as balls. Um,
Really?
yeah,
Here it
it's
is.
kind of warm. No, here actually no, here it's gray and overcast at about 48 Fahrenheit. So that's I don't know what is that Celsius.
You're asking one of the most maths illiterate people.
I
You
know,
know, when you're
I know.
working out tempos,
Yeah,
even this half, I have to use it. I'm not joking. What's half of 145 BPM?
yeah. Oh no,
Calculate.
a friend of mine, a friend of mine who's Canadian is like, no, it's really easy. You divide by three, and then you multiply by three to get to Fahrenheit, and then I was like Morton, like we're both artists. I don't think that well, like that fast. And he's like, so I'll just ask Siri about it. But so we're live and we're going. I wonder. I don't know if there's anybody here, but let's just see what's happening on. Okay, so there's two people here now. Well, welcome,
Oh, wow.
whoever you are. Yeah, I'll try to keep up with the chat. I don't know if there is one. Ugh, there isn't. I forget how to create a chat. Oh well, you'll just have to watch us. There's got to be one. Yeah, the neophyte live streamer here really has to get his shit together. Excuse my language. Let me just
This
see
is
if
my
I can do
first.
that. This is
Okay.
this is like on the go. This reminds me of something. Since we have an audience now. Um, uh, like, do you remember? We were complaining about in a conversation about having to like wire stuff up and just spend all this time on stuff that is not what we think is germane to making music, but
Mm.
we're like doing all this other crap, and I can't verify anyway, and and like the stuff that's not directly like composing and creating, and I remember I think I told you, I talked to Robert Henke last year, and
Mm.
of Ableton and Monolake, and I said that to him, and he's like, no, no, no. It's you have to think like you are Da Vinci, like you are the great masters, and you do these things, all differently. I know he's got both a French and German accent, but it's early here in America. Um, and he reminded me that that is really true in the classic spirit of the philomath.
Mm,
We you kind of have to do a lot of stuff yourself
mm,
rather than try to well, it's nice if you can afford to have people to do stuff for you, but generally, you're back there scrambling around, and it was a good thing to remember, to be reminded of that, because it's true that we're hopefully, I think we're trying to do stuff that's outside of what we've heard and what may be the norm, and that's the way you get it, not by farting around on with the same old thing. Like, you get it from doing like uh, doing the work, in the trenches, so to speak. All right, I've
I
stopped
agree.
messing with. Now have four screens with your face in mind, and let me tell you, from my point of view, that's four times too many faces of me. Anyway,
Oh,
um,
you're looking wonderful,
well,
Charles.
well,
Honestly.
thank you. I'm so proud of myself for shaving. Um, and yeah, but so before we went live, we were talking about we were listening to each other's music, and I guess maybe it should be said now, rather than people think we had this wonderfully planned and organized thing like it's Red Bull Academy or something. But you messaged me yesterday and said, "Hey, do you want to talk about our last couple of albums?" And I said, "Hell yeah!" Um, and then I messaged you in the middle of last night with some idea like, "Why don't we live stream?" And I'm like, "Oh, I woke him up. Oh, god damn it!" And then you texted me back, and I was also asleep, but I woke up. But so I'm really glad we did this. But we were talking about our music, and of course now forgotten. Um, but well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't remember what we were saying, but we were. I was saying. Well, one thing for me was interesting was, even though uh, I've been lucky enough that you've played me stuff of yours released from the last couple of albums. But um, what was my thought? It just left me. Um, but I loved that. Okay, yeah, I loved that there was things I was still picking up that I hadn't heard in previous listens, um, and just that. It just I'm continually amazed by how you compose and how you put stuff together. Mainly, I think what's interesting is because I mean, we've talked about this too. I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about not being able to read music all that well. I think I can read it maybe at like a five-grade level. I can read a staff and then kind of hammer out where a note is and or a key. But you're very, I'm not blowing smoke. You're a very accomplished musician. You're classically trained. I've seen your videos of you just playing piano, and it's absolutely beautiful. Um, Usually, what I've found in my experience, and it's not that broad ranging, but I've found that a lot of people who who are working in electronic music, especially the area kind of where we work, sort of, the edge, or experimental, and sort of the edge of experimental. A lot of them don't like. I'll put it this way, best. Sorry, it's But years ago, Liza Minnelli did an album with the Pet Shop Boys, which you would think would be astounding, but it wasn't. Kind of. It was really because, and it wasn't the fault of either of the two of them, because the Pet Shop Boys are amazing, and Liza Minnelli's amazing. But the two of them together, it was like, I think it was Liza Minnelli was singing her way, but on pop music, and it's very different. Obviously, you probably know that even better than I, from working with a great deal of musicians. And it's, yeah, the word I use for stuff like that is kind of, it's like people can sometimes be tourists. So, they're just kind of visiting there, but that's not where they live. So, but the great thing with your music that I love is that you're not a tourist. In fact, I will go so far as to say, Robert Logan, you are a cannibal, and that's not an accusation, but hear me out, because like and there's on both Regenesis and on both and on Brutalist, sure, there's elements where I hear it's like, oh, that's similar to like some sound or like a particular song, and not in like a derivative like you ripped it off way, but it's a similar sort of motif. And sometimes and obviously you'll hear some people, they try to make something like, God forgive me, but late period Kraftwerk doesn't hit as well as early period, because it's almost like they're trying to go back and you know get that essence of what they were working with initially. I hope I'm making sense here as I wrap
I'm
up.
trying to do.
Okay.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, but like yeah, you don't you it's like it lives in the music, and the music, great thing about your music is, even though it's electronic and this stuff, there's a very organic, I would say cybernetic quality to it. Now, regarding the cannibal thing, it's not just that you worked with Grace Jones and she has an amazing song Cannibal, which I will admit it did partly fill in there. But I feel like when you're doing this stuff, you're really absorbing it and taking it in, and almost metabolizing it, so that like you're getting this essence of others, and that's what I mean by the cannibal thing.
I
So
really like
so
it. I'm
it's
going
a
to
little
steal
graphic.
that.
Yeah, all right, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'll
That's
send you a
great.
Venmo receipt. But yeah, but that's the thing. I forget exactly what we were saying before, but that's the one thing I really want to say is just it's really amazing to hear someone, to fully get this into the music too, because like also, like I've heard you've done some commercial work, and I've heard bits and bobs here. Nothing, of course, that you didn't clear with the client first to play, and you work great in that world, but like I get that you live in this world that you create in Regenesis and Brutalist. And I cede my time to the gentleman from England.
No, no. It's very kind of you to say those things. I thought we were going to start with your history, but you.
Oh, we can talk about me, Robert. Believe me, I love to. But that was what was first on my head. But feel free to talk about me, Robert. I'm almost all ears. Like 1/3 is one ears. Now,
No, that's. I think that comes when you intuit things rather than overthink. When you get into any conscious, I'm going to explore this world and combine this with this. Maybe other people can do that well, but I think I run into trouble very quickly. So it seems best to not think too hard about what it is that's happening. But your observation is totally true. I've seen classical composers I look up to say they're doing electronic music and they've got an effects box and a few processes going on, and that's the sum total of their rendition of electronic music. I don't mean that in a horrible way, but yeah, there's not much of a conversation when that's all that's going on. But it goes in all directions. I don't really read or write music anymore though, because even for orchestral work, all they need is stems, and that's completely bypassed. I would probably be about as bad as, not calling you bad, but I'd probably be even worse than you now. Even when I used to do sight reading, I made it up half the time. I seem to get better marks if I just.
Did you ever get caught out when you were doing that, or?
No, I did. If I did, I don't know about it. It's because they read it quickly and then they give you the music.
Right.
So as long as I get the time signature right and then the key signature, and vaguely hop around on where the notes seem to be landing, but it was never natural. I was always terrible at it.
Interesting. I would have thought it would have come very, very easily to you, but that's, I mean, that's good to know, because I that it wasn't natural. Do you think? I mean, you grew up with very. I mean, were both your parents musicians, or just your father?
My father mainly. My mum can play the banjo
Uh huh.
and sing pretty well. She does like traditional folk music.
Oh, interesting.
Since her strokes, she can't do that as much, but
Mm.
she still, yeah, she relearned how to speak, and so
Oh, wow.
I'd mainly say it's my father who,
Hmm.
from about the age of 4, used to sit me down with headphones and play entire symphonies, and they did hold my
Oh, wow.
attention for the entire duration.
Oh, that's
Somehow,
fascinating.
yeah,
That's
I'm
that's very
sure that
so.
helped.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, Dad.
Making a 4-year-old sit through like an entire, Mozart opus is, it was hard enough getting one to sit long enough so I could go to the bathroom when my daughter was little, but that's pretty amazing. Um, but so, I mean, so were you? When did you first hear electronic? Like, what was the first electronic music you heard?
It was actually Jean-Michel Jarre.
Uh,
It's not a very cool. I mean, I still like
you can't
bits
mess
and
with the
pieces.
masters.
uh, it was a weird order. It began with Stravinsky and the Russian Five and all the romantic and 20th century classical
Hmm.
people. And then my dad found an old Jean-Michel Jarre CD, and I think that's the utility of someone like that. The word utility is weird. What I mean is, even if people look down on him, for a kid, it's really imagination grabbing.
Yeah.
If you hear Zuluk, and like a 9 year
Oh
old,
yeah. No, he's amazing. Uh, when I was in high school, we had this great art teacher, and I'm interrupting you. We had a great art teacher who let us. He let us, like, me and two or three friends, take over like one of the empty ceramics rooms or something during our class, and I'd be able to bring in music. And back then it was, a boombox with a cassette player, and he'd come in and I'd be playing like Depeche Mode and all sorts of stuff. And then um, one day he's like, I brought in a tape I'd like you to hear. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, he's older guy. I'm like, oh God, it's going to be something from the 60s or folk music, or, big band music like my parents play. And it was Jean-Michel Jarre. And I'm like, what
oh,
is this? And he's like, oh, it's, I love this kind of music. I'm like, oh my God. And he, like, both of my art teachers, he and his colleague, Bob Levine, were really instrumental in, like I think kind of like your dad was. It's like showing you this other world out there. In my case, it wasn't necessarily just visual art, but it was sound as well. So yeah,
which one was it? Which Jean-Michel Jarre? Do you
I
remember?
don't remember. It was 1986 or 87 when this happened, so it couldn't have been any earlier or any later than that. I'm pretty sure it might have been like, I don't know. I'd have to go back. I never found it again. I'll have to go listen to his stuff more deeply, and
Mm.
and listen in on it, and just see which one it was. But yeah, it was very, like, there's nothing wrong. I think, yeah, sure, he's may not be popular now, but I for me, I realized long ago, despite being a very arrogant musically, and like my taste is the best and everyone else is just, trash. I realized I couldn't trash the people, the shoulders of the giants I stand on, like, Emerson, like Jean-Michel Jarre, like, Edgar Winter, anybody I didn't like or whatever, that was like, I don't know. For a while, I just rebelled against music solely because my eldest brother liked it, because I'm petty or something, and it was like prog rock or something. But then you go back and you're like, well, Yes had some amazing keyboard players or bass players, whatever. So I have to respect that. So yeah, Jar's he's pretty amazing.
And it's what it represented as well, because I don't listen to him so much now, but the idea that you could not only improvise on a piano, which is I loved to do that for hours a day, like a 5, 6 year old, but then
it shows. It's still there. It's great.
oh, yeah, I'm not sure how coherent it was, but the idea that you could actually edit the sounds you were playing, and it became immediately apparent that there was a there was no need to divide these worlds. Music is sound and sound is music.
Yeah.
I know people differentiate different aspects of music, but it seemed really natural to not do that. I think you learn that as you make music. I was lucky to be born when DAWs were capable of some audio editing, so from the beginning, you're
Yeah.
bending sounds. And I don't know what it was like for you though. So you started with very
Well,
different
let's see.
equipment.
For me, it was different because I had to wake up my brothers and sisters on the farm. I had to first check and make sure the bears hadn't eaten any of them. Then, once I'd done my chores and I was given my chip, I was allowed to get enough kerosene to power the DAW. No, I'm kidding. No, I think it's so cool that I mean you're older than my daughter's 26, but it's I think the tools available in that time are very are somewhat similar. When I started playing, and I started in 1984 when my grandfather passed away and gave me we inherited a Yamaha CE25 keyboard from him, which was just a preset keyboard. And it was basically, it's like, it was the guts, more or less, of a DX7, but there was some fantastic, I think there was a little bit of analog circuitry in there too, because the strings are just, they're like Elka strings. Like, yeah, or like, I don't know if you know the song Visions in Blue by Ultravox. They were,
I should know. I mean, I have heard it, but I can't bring it to mind.
yeah, well, get cracking, son. I mean, it was made, what, 6 years before you were born. No, but anyway, in it has these really beautiful, lush strings, and I remember reading. I poured through music magazines as a kid to read about gear and what bands were doing and stuff. And I remember reading that they so thought they were so cool because they got to go to the Yamaha offices and like get the engineers to tweak the strings on one of theirs was a Yamaha GS1, which I think was like a combination of like strings and or piano or something. And they got to tweak it and they got to help, the engineers help them make the envelopes faster so the strings were a little more responsive. But that keyboard, like I drove my poor mother nuts. Like when my grandfather got it, because when he was alive, we'd go up to his house in Maine and I would just, play like single notes on it. And he had, one big practice amp, just enormous, a 12-inch woofer. And like, I would just turn it up. My grandfather, poor guy, was like, nodding off asleep, probably deaf. Anyway, and my mother's like, oh my God, my father's dying. My world is collapsing. And my son won't stop playing that one goddamn note. But anyway, it started from that and just that sound. And then like, right around then, this was like 84. So DAWs, I think were, DAW pretty much still on the horizon. I think maybe like um, PPG, Waldorf was maybe putting something together. But there was, yeah, because I remember, Thomas Dolby got to use, I think he bought like a bunch of prototype stuff that Olaf Palm made for somebody, either Kraftwerk or like Tangerine Dream or something. Oh yeah, no, because he worked with Tangerine Dream a lot. And I think he bought some some auction stuff, and one of them was a hard disk recorder. It's probably about the size of like a refrigerator now, and it had maybe 8 megabytes on it. But mere mortals didn't get hold of those until later. But yeah, so it was cassette. It was like Porta Studios were the thing, and I had several. I have several. I have a couple of them behind me in my storage space. And yeah, it was cassettes and just it's funny because we've talked about this before, but I'm sure you can relate. There's that I think it's the fire of youth and just sort of being young and bold and a little stupid. Like I was so driven to learn how to record my music. The first way I did it was bouncing cassettes on a double cassette deck and then like putting in I didn't turn off the thing, so God forgive me.
I thought you were really happy about bouncing to
I
cassette
am,
deck.
I am, yeah. Woohoo! So, but I'd bounce them out, and then I'd input stuff from the other side, and you'd get horrible regression of sound. It was terrible, but oh, you were close to it. And then with Porta Studio, you could start to do like more multi-tracking and stuff. And I was never so adventurous that I would like bounce stuff down to the nth degree like friends of mine would. But that was really it was such a wonderful time. Although I'm terrified of those tapes getting out into the world. I should probably put a note on the box and say that for my daughter, who I've jokingly already said, you're taking care of my estate, whatever, however many dollars that is, be it 10 or 20. But like some of those things are pretty bad. But at the same time, there was like just so much fun, and like you've got like a microphone and some tape, and you're running around like the house recording things, like driving people crazy, and then I lost you there for a second. You still there? Hang on. We may have lost young Logan. We pause now for Robert Logan.
Hey.
Are you back? There he is.
Hi.
Yep.
Great.
You disappeared for a second.
My apologies. I can still hear you, but
it's okay.
my rather bad camera just ejected itself.
No problem. Come on, Henry. Come here, buddy. Come here. Come on. It's Robert Logan. Sorry, Henry the dog had to come and join the chat. But anyway, yeah. So you have that joy of like running around and recording stuff and just making dumb things, and like out of all that you maybe Henry, you can come in. It's just a closed door, you giant baby. Sorry, my children. This isn't as good an interruption as that the one of the little girl when the guy's talking about a North Korean bomb threat. And
that comes in.
But yeah, they're just that it's so much fun to just do that stuff and be ridiculous. And what's interesting is, I think I've mentioned to you, we've chatted on Mastodon with like other folks we know there. Like I realized something that in the last year, I was not experimenting very much anymore, and I didn't realize how long I'd been doing that, and I was just sort of horrified because my lack of experimentation, even though I feel like that's kind of where I live, is like experimenting and sort of working on, I'm not working on the bleeding edge of electronic music, but I tend to work in stuff that's a little off the beaten path. And yet I was shocked when I really thought about how little I was experimenting, and how much I had taken a lot of the joy out of making music for myself. And what I found was like I had to start forcing myself to like throw a fader too far or turn a knob too far, drastically knock a patch or something out of tune, and then I'd force myself, not force, but I'd be like, okay, you got to figure out how to get back to where that patch was. And I'm lucky that I have a number of friends like you, like the folks on Mastodon we chat with, and especially we've both been lucky enough to like talk a lot on Mastodon with Sean Booth from Otecker, which has been amazing. Just to I used to be really coy about it because I didn't want like hopefully he's not going to hate this, but like about being on there, and then I saw I saw my username on Reddit, on the Otecker subreddit, and I'm like, fuck, well, yeah. Someone screenshotted something Sean said about one of the albums or something, and I'd asked him a question or something, and that was how. But anyway, it that, and yeah, so talking to like you and Sean, and then a good friend of mine, he's really, I call him more of a friend tour,
What? I didn't catch that.
you know, a friend and mentor.
Oh, right.
You know,
That's a nice made up word there.
mentage sounds weird, like, you know, an obscure French toothpaste. You know, illumer les dents avec mentage. Um, but anyway, um, Nathan is like, he's a fascinating guy. He's a musician, an artist. He's done VFX works in Hollywood, like he worked on the Spawn movie. And by the way, when I'm like leaning down like this, it's because I'm patting the dog. I'm not doing anything nefarious. I just have a very needy child. But anyway, Nathan was saying in some conversations we had in other places, he's like, I really like when I go out to play. He said, I don't think I'm going to have a good performance unless I have butterflies in my stomach.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I thought, well, I'm a generally anxious person, so I kind of do that anyway. But what does he mean? And he said that he, in his, like when he does performances or something, and he's doing a lot of stuff with like a modular rig. He said, I like to have things where I know them, but also where there's an element of surprise. And
Yeah.
and it's interesting. And in the last year, what I've been doing more is working with more. I have like two separate arrangements of gear. I have this room here, which is my main studio in the basement. There's keyboards stacked behind me and other stuff. And then upstairs in the master bedroom, I have like a smaller rack of hardware stuff. And that setup is solely hardware. And it's been fascinating to work between the two, but then approaching it with like, I'm going to say it's like rewilding myself in a way, in that I'm you know, teaching myself to experiment and kind of do loopy things like I would when I was a kid. Like I was, I always remember one thing I remember as a kid that was really, it stands out to me as just, you know, how I was as a young kid, but also like a good way of experimentation. Um, I had I'd stolen my brother's guitar amp and a bad microphone and his MXR flanger box, you know, an old school gray one. And I had the vacuum cleaner. And somehow I'd figured out that if you ran the vacuum and put the mic in and then ran the flanger, you could play the vacuum sound through the amp. Not that the vacuum itself wasn't loud enough already. Wow. But I was essentially doing like these, you know, woo woo, you know, it's sort of like full contact theremin in a way.
I like that.
Yeah, it was so much fun. Yeah.
Did you record it?
I did not. I'll have to see. I may have, but I may have to reproduce it because I still have the box, but the MXR flanger. But from that, what I started doing more was trying to be more experimental, just letting things happen. So, you know, if it's on the DAW where I'm strictly kind of mousing around and using, you know, or using a controller, it's like just start turning shit and see what happens. Like, you know, until you don't like something. And that sounds, I'm sure a lot of people, you know, all two of the people who are watching this or whatever would be like, oh my God, that's so dumb. Like, dude, don't you do all that already? And I was like, no. I was like, I think I got into a trap for a while of thinking that like my music, everything had to be very contained and controlled, and every, you know, parameter shift had to be a perfect linear line or whatever. And I'm proud to say that the music since then has become a lot thornier and to my ears definitely weirder, but also better in a lot of ways. I think more expressive.
I like your new stuff more. Yeah,
thank you.
I'm enjoying it more and more, and I completely agree. I don't see the point. That's too strong a way of putting it, but for me, like you have to be discovering as you make, and that's the difference between the commercial side of what people do, which is still really exciting, and there's little things to enjoy and explore within quite a strict parameter space. But when you're doing your own stuff, it's really time to adventure and
Yeah, I would. I
hopefully
mean,
as you make find some new viewpoints. Really,
yeah,
it's really thrilling.
they're two very different things, I would think, because in the commercial stuff, it's like the client says we want something that sounds like this,
Mm.
and we know what we like, and that's what we want. And when it's your own stuff, of course, you're just like, nah, what's this? I'm waffling about. So yeah, obviously two very different pursuits. I've done very little of that work, but it's interesting to straddle that, and I've gotten better lately about putting stuff together that meets the needs of whoever's asking for it. But I won't.
That's good.
I won't. Yeah, it's good. Well, it's been a good lesson for me to learn how to um, to learn how to catch something rather not to capture something rather than um, I, I'm a big fan of like surrealism and Dadaism and the
Mm.
power of chance and coincidence, and how much of that is the elements of the universe aligning, and how much of that is, well, a bug flew in a window and landed on a fader and moved it a half millimeter.
Bug music, man, that's
Yeah,
the
bug
best.
music. See, now that's where the next thing is. Because that apex twig, that guy, woo. Um,
I don't know
but
what I was thinking. Anyway.
but like yeah, so more experimenting, and yeah, you're right. What's interesting is I've been making music for 41 years almost, which is yeah, which is
Wow.
kind of crazy. Yeah, 1984, Reagan was
Wow,
president. Yeah,
cool.
yeah, and one thing I love about that is one thing you know I really feel like in the last 10 years was when I really started to get. I think I don't want to say it's where my music got good, but it's where I started to really put myself into like a different place and move things. Um, yeah, more experimental. I think is that, and just
Mm.
and exposing myself to more. And what's really interesting about that is that even in that period, I think like the last 5 years have been even more. Um, I've made like even more ambitious music, maybe.
Mm.
Um, and where I think we're usually our own harshest critics, and I'm just like, oh, it's you know, you haven't made anything good since blah blah blah. And what's been great is some older tracks of mine that people have heard um, were really like, oh wow, that's really good, and it's one like um, it's ones that were just I thought now I'm like, oh, that's so self indulgent,
Yeah.
but it's it's great to hear that other people were picking up what I was putting down in that time, because for a lot of reasons I feel like I operate in a vacuum, and part of it
Mm.
was for many years I didn't play my stuff for other people. Like I literally didn't start putting my music out there until 1996. So like
That's
12
a long
years
time
after.
to sit on stuff.
Yeah,
Wow.
12 years after making stuff. I mean, I'd give tapes to friends and send stuff
Mm.
out, but I really had terrible, terrible low self confidence and low self esteem, and I just didn't think it was worthy. But at the same time, I had that, like we were talking earlier about that drive as a kid to just like do stuff. And so I like I played out a bit, but yeah, it wasn't like I said, last 10 years. And what's interesting too is that 10 years coincides with like the period where I really started to like realize I had some severe mental health issues I had to deal with, and I went on medication and regular therapy, and not surprising, it's actually made a lot of things better in my life. Not not just music, but I think other stuff I'm doing, for whatever reason. So the two are coinciding, and yeah, so like, and in the last year, like the two albums we were talking about were of mine, Overworld and All Labyrinth No Minotaur. What's really interesting is between the two, and I know I said earlier I was yeah, I was listening to it. What's funny is I was listening to one of them, and I was listening to Overworld, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't hear some of these things before.
You
Like
mean
some
you didn't
bits of,
hear your own details?
yeah, yeah. I just like
Mm-hmm.
little bits at the end of like of a song or something. Yeah, I had to go here and like go like look at the list, the track list. So like on Overworld, and the two albums are very different in very interesting ways. Overworld is almost entirely new material from 2024, and with that, well, with both of them, but really that I was really trying to start expressing this kind of newer stuff that had been newer ideas that I've been working on a lot more. I wanted my stuff, not necessarily. I'm going to admit something now that's very embarrassing, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person. Um, as a big fan of Otecker since since almost the beginning with Amber, like I think it's safe to say we all kind of make our music and see if how it compares to that of our idols and our masters, not masters, but our idols, and I would very often get into this thing of like comparing it, like, oh, I'm not hitting that, oh, I'm not getting in this place, and yet I realized, like, later on I was like, oh, you actually were doing you were going to that place that you wanted, you just couldn't hear it in that moment, and you were, I was hitting those benchmarks might be a stupid way to put it, but I was really achieving the things I was trying to put forth,
Mm-hmm.
and so like I got into a really bad habit, especially when I was younger, of like of comparing my stuff, A being it in my head with the latest Otecker release, and at one point I dropped that, and it was very powerful to be able to do that. It wouldn't go fully away. I think it was my inner critic saying, hey, this doesn't sound like Sickly Sweet, or this doesn't sound like Chiastic Slide. You suck. You should sell everything and go work at a gas station. But what I've been finding in 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 the more recent work, like on Overworld, was I was getting to that place that I wanted of finding a way to convey an atmosphere or a mood or something that wasn't necessarily through playing a chord or trying to put together like necessarily like a very evocative string sound or
Mm-hmm.
or arpeggio line or something, but really like how do you put forth this idea with without necessarily using what's the word, cliched sort of like cultural cues.
Exactly. You don't want to recourse to the most.
Yeah,
It's not exciting. You know what tends to work, but why not try and evoke the same thing using
exactly.
a
Like
yeah,
there was
I
a
completely
great
agree.
interview from years and years ago with Jim O'Brien, um, who's produced. He played in Sonic Youth for a while. Sorry, the dog needs massive pats at the moment while I say this.
Oh,
Um,
Henry.
poor, he's just like he's sacked out on the floor, and he's in heaven because he's got almost my full attention, and he's lying on my feet.
He's like, why
Um,
is Dad just talking to the
I know
air?
he's like, why is he's just talking to the air. But Jim O'Brien said something like, and I have massive respect for Trent Reznor. I used to not, and then I realized like he's actually brilliant. But
Mm-hmm.
Jim O'Brien was saying in the thing, Trent Reznor makes a spooky sound, and then we all get the cue. Oh, that's spooky because he said it in a spooky setting. But and then Jim O'Brien's like, well, but what is spooky? And then
Yeah.
it kind of extrapolated to like a bigger discussion of like you know reality breeding, being all about agreement. But it really was interesting. It was like, yeah, what is what am I trying to convey with this musical gesture or expression?
Mm-hmm.
And funnily enough, it reminds me too now of like one of my favorite movie soundtracks and scores is In Cold Blood, which is Quincy Jones, who rest in peace.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
more and
that's
more I think about him, guy was just amazing.
mm,
Um, but that soundtrack, that score is a lot of it is almost all percussion, and
yeah.
it's really interesting because it's a very heavy soundtrack, and and he conveys that with percussion. And over the years, I was thinking, oh, that's cool, but I wonder if there's another way you can do that with a soundtrack that's just percussion. And then um, there's a TV show of the it's based on the movie and the books of Get Shorty, and there was the Get
Mm,
Shorty movie with John Travolta, but the series is uh, uh, Ray Romano plays like the movie director, and then oh god, he's an Irish actor. He was in the crowd, tall fella.
I'm terrible with
I
actors.
know it's like something I can't remember his name now, and chat's broken, so I can't find out. We're all doomed. Anyway, he plays the hitman, the John Travolta type. But the score, I think, is Cliff Martinez, who did, among other things, Drive and Solaris and some other things. The
Yeah.
score is a lot of drums
Mm,
and like a basic kit, but it's like some brushwork and stuff, and it's great because you just hear him like he conveys like oh, they're doing a sneaky thing here, or
mm.
oh, there's he's going to find his wife is sleeping with the guy here, and like conveying different things like that. Oh. So back to me, my second favorite subject, um, the first being Henry. um, no, but it's been fascinating to me to find being able to finally create like the stuff I'm hearing and kind of imagining in my head, and like the soundscapes and stuff, like kind of a lot of the like on Overworld, a lot of sort of the atmospheric stuff. I know I beat it to death. Like I've said myself, like I can take a good theme and just beat it into paste over 8 minutes, 9 minutes. I love repeating themes. It's very much from my study of Philip Glass and some Stockhausen and stuff. But I also love really long fade outs. Again, I blame Otecker because I just would fall in love with these songs. Like especially for a while, a lot of their final songs on albums were just these monster things that were insane and sometimes very difficult to listen to. But
Mm.
what I but so I really enjoy like having like a big bed of like in Ableton, for instance, I have basically three effects returns. One is a analog delay for my dub fader throws that I abuse to the end of the earth, but hey man, dub is the voice of God, so what are you going to do? The second
Neuromancer, yeah.
is yeah, exactly. Yeah, Malcolm is my favorite character in Neuromancer.
Oh,
When
oh,
he came in, I was like,
interesting.
oh, I just like imagine a ship full of Rastafarians. Like, oh god, that'd be great. Anyway, but like, so I have a delay and then a reverb, um, and then I have a very long looping delay that is fascinating because and it's like I think it's color. Usually, I've been using color copy by Yuhi, but what's interesting is when you do that and you put stuff through the send and you open it up. If you do it right, at the end you get this really there you go. I did it right. If you get this really fantastic bed of just I think the musician Robert Rich calls it slurm, and I think
Oh,
that's one of the
he's
people.
invoked Lurk. I love
Yes,
that.
yes. Okay,
Lurk, yeah.
yeah. I think no slurm. I think is from Futurama, but yeah. But he's like he does it, and it's beautiful because you get just this mess, and
Mm.
it reminds me of like I don't know Terminator 2 where they throw the T-1000 in the vat in the foundry, and he's all messy and he's like turning into like bits of the people he's copied. In that scenario, that's kind of what it sounds like because it's you build this bed of all these elements from earlier in the song, and then at the end you have this, this kind of this soup, and there's just, and there's, because, and you leave it to the chance of machines and everything, and then you get this glorious thing, and you just let it run out, and that's like, yeah. I was listening to, on Overworld, I was listening to Dots on Dots Forever, and there was like something, and this is like this is something that I aspire to, but is so hard to do, I think, on a conscious level, is in your own music, make stuff that's sort of so multifaceted and whatnot, that later on you discover hidden gems within it. Because, like, you know, I as I've said, I write for Igloo magazine, and I'm late on a review of of Amber, for its 30th anniversary, which obviously was last year. But anyway, but in re-listening to that, it's amazing how much, and not just an Otecker, be it, it could be anything from Depeche Mode, Killing Joke, The Cure, Mono Lake, your stuff, or anything. Where there's just this little bit that comes out, and you hear, and you're like, oh my god, I never heard that before, and you listen, and it's like, oh, it wasn't a trick, it wasn't like some outside sound bleeding through. It was this hidden thing, and that's just so amazing to find that stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's what I want, is like, you know stuff that just keeps unfolding. Because something I've known about my music, and recently, something that you shared, I think, on Mastodon really helped, was me to find, that was that great video of the guy who invented Max. The what's his name? Chow something. The
FM synthesis.
FM synthesis. Thank you. FM synthesis. Yeah, not Max.
No worries.
No, it came from that. I know I'll be fined later by the Max police, but it's okay. One learns by the whip, or by the by the pencil. No. But
they'll be off to you.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's got to get their money. But in it, he talked about ear-based music versus note-based, and that was like, oh, that's the phrase I've been trying to use. Because all this time, like, my first little record label I called Music for the Third Ear, because I was saying to people, playing for my music for family and friends who had no clue what I'm doing. I was saying to people, like, no, you gotta listen to it diagonally. You can't take it straight on. Like, there's stuff happening, and they'd be like, why doesn't this sound like the Beatles? Or this doesn't sound like Top 40. And it was that thing where, and that's why and that's one thing that drew me to, so-called IDM, or that brand of electronic stuff, where it's like, people are making stuff that really is built for repeated listens, and not necessarily like with a train spotter level of attention, but like, repeated listens, and things unfold, and you hear things differently.
Exactly.
And it's fascinating. Like, and I know what's great too is, I also, I've been doing this for a long time. I really do try to keep myself. I push myself, and hopefully I will do this till the day I die, to do new and different things all the time. I don't want to get stuck in a rut of like, oh, I made this song and it sounds half like Richard H. Kirk, and a third like Kraftwerk, and then another half like Otek or Mono, whatever. I want to keep doing new things, and that's why, like, my more recent stuff, I'm very happy that a couple of people have said, wow, it's really stripped down. I'm like, oh, excellent. And they're like, oh, but it still works, because I'm pretty fond of having 3 different drum parts going at the same time, very loud with a lot of delay. And it's taken me a long time until recently to make them sound clear and get them so they're, staged properly. But yeah, to know that I'm hitting things differently like that is it's really gratifying that other people are getting it. And Overworld, that album itself is really about, I mean, the idea was kind of partly about like shutting myself in with a certain amount of, I have some mild agoraphobic issues. I'm working on it, but I like staying down here in my little basement. It's a comfy place.
So I thought,
yeah, exactly. Like, I thought of like life in terms of, I don't want to touch much on, politics, but right now in America, it's kind of fucking weird. And like, it was my feeling of that, like, hiding from it and just sort of going underground until things change. I think maybe it's also too because I was watching like that series Silo on Apple and a couple other things that dealt with like, you know, people going into subterranean cities and the
Mm.
chaos that unfolds there. And it's also, this album is also, it's that, and I was thinking about, subterranean spaces and sort of portraying them, but also a little bit of like, uh, you know, the idea of sort of protecting oneself from the exterior world, i.e., the overworld, while you live in the underground. And so, to me, some of the songs, like "No Concessions" is the second song of Overworld, is to me is very much like a fight song. Like I
Mm.
thought about a lot about seeing like film videos of like people protesting all over the world and fighting with police and throwing bricks and fire and stuff. Not that I want to do that because I'm a little old and out of shape for hucking bombs at cops. Um, and yeah, if the NSA is listening, I'm a good citizen and I sit quietly in my basement. But like I was thinking of that stuff, like of something like that. At the same time, like that album, like it has some really pretty bits,
Mm.
um, which is something I'm also kind of learning to do more. I think interestingly, my last couple albums that have come out, people have used the word that they've never used with my music before, which is happy and upbeat. Which
Wow, happy and upbeat.
I was like, what am I doing wrong? But it's like I was really hitting that. But like, yeah, like Dots on Dots Forever. That whole thing, that was just about, it's kind of lighter in spirit. But yeah, Overworld was a lot of songs using a lot of newer songs using a lot of newer ideas, like employing
Mm.
them, and that's what came up over the year with experimenting and whatnot. Now, comparing that with All Labyrinth, and I appreciate you staying awake while I talk all this time.
It's
Um,
all good. I'm enjoying
but
it.
but All Labyrinth was fascinating because I also last year I had a big problem. I realized towards the end of the year that I'd pushed myself to the point where I wasn't enjoying making music, and I just
Mhm.
I managed to strangle most of the love and life out of it, and I told Mike, the guy who runs Triplicate Records, which is a great label with a lot of great stuff on it. I told Mike from Triplicate that I'd give him an album, and then he was like, it's the type of thing I don't know how you operate, but I was like, yeah, sure, you can have an album, and then like he sets the deadline, beginning of 2025, and I think I said yes to it back in March of 2024. Then all of a sudden he's like, "Where's that album?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, what?" Like,
Oh
and
yeah, the album.
I have a reputation of having of making like a ton of music all the time and having a vast backlog of tracks similar to like Prince's mythical vault. Um, and I'm proud to say that might have been the case like 3 years ago, but now there's not, I don't have. I think at one point I had like 4 albums in the can ready to go, and but it wasn't the
Whoa.
case. Yeah, it was kind of weird. But I was also, that started after the pandemic, and I was working in a very I realized I was working in a very compulsive manner where I was just pushing myself and really to just create music solely for like mostly for the endorphin hit, because it
Mm.
was the only way I was getting like feeling good was like making new music. Um, but anyway, Mike, he wanted an album. I'm like, he's like, well, can you at least give me a title? And I'm like, All Labyrinth and No Minotaur, which was, which was a punchline from there's a, I don't know if you've seen it. There's an old comic strip here in the States called Nancy and Sluggo. It's like old black and white.
Ah.
And it's, and Sluggo is like, he's a little kid, but he looks like a 1920s Union Buster because he's got a shaved head and a newsboy's cap and a he's always wearing boots, and for a little kid, he looks like he's fucking dock worker. Um, but anyway, I was like, I don't have anything. What the fuck? So I started looking at like songs that I hadn't put on other albums, songs that were like, kind of sitting around that were discarded. And most of All Labyrinth and No Minotaur is tracks that are anywhere from 3 to like 7, 5 years old. And they're things that just were never coming together. It just weren't landing. And all of a sudden I would sit there with them and kind of work them over and start to hear new and different things. And then they slowly became songs until they became that album. And that was really interesting to go back, and I think there was a thread on Mastodon where I don't know why I opened up a song file of mine, and I was just like, I was looking at the Ableton Live set. I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking? And and Sean Booth said, that's funny because I opened up the file for Vice Coast Poise on off of Confield, and he said, I have no idea how that patch works. And that was like, that was so thrilling to hear that from someone you look up to, and someone who the pictures of their Macs, the monolith that they use, very inscrutable to a lot of other people, if you haven't used it. But it was great to go back and look at those files of mine and realize that, like when I'd made them, and this is something I've been starting to understand too about my own work, is like well, right now I'm going through a period where like 2 weeks ago or 2 3 weeks ago I was making like a lot of tracks, and they were really great, and I liked it. I was getting good response. And since then, been a lot of dog shit in Ableton, and not Henry's, mine. And what I realize now, after all these years, is that like I don't trash stuff anymore when it's not working. I just save it and put it aside, and then I'll go back and open it up later. And what's funny is like songs like on All Labyrinth, like the first couple of songs, especially like Dymaxian American comes to mind. Um, it it is in the time I was making it, I didn't understand what I was trying to get at, but all of a sudden going back to it later, like going back and finding it now, I realized I was I I I was what I was looking for was already there, and it was perfect. It just needed a little bit of tweaking and little stuff, not to make it sound new and up to date, but just so it sounded cohesive. And that's another thing. I know I'm kind of rambling thanks to coffee, but like, another thing I found is, it's something I found is that like, like I'm not necessarily, I may not know what I'm aiming for in the moment, or I may not find it necessarily, but sooner or later I'll be able to go back and look at that thing and say, oh, okay, that's what I was trying to do. And leaving a lot of um, leaving a lot of things back to like what I was saying, to chance and some coincidence, and just it's very very hard to do, but like letting the process unfold itself, and just put something away and let it kind of you know ferment, or whatever you want to say, until like it makes, and then later on you'll find that thing makes some sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's pretty wild.
I would never have guessed that about that album. That's really interesting. That
Yeah.
shows how.
And let me tell you, I agonize about my music a lot, and I blame to a certain degree Photek, because I read an interview with him in The Wire where he said, "Oh yeah, I listened to my tracks," and this is when he put out like the Camera Eye and Modus Operandi, which are these amazing, like heavy, earlier, not early because they came out in the thousands, 2000s, like they're drum and bass, but they're deep, like deep programming and stuff. And so from hearing that for the last 20 years, I've listened to my songs obsessively. And sometimes I've listened to them so much I've absolutely screwed them up. But I've realized that, that's good in a way because it's made me make my music better. And I'm a little appalled at how many albums I've released that have some real solid clam notes. Just, it's not jazz. It's just, I'm playing out of key or, it's off. But now, like, I'm, that was another thing that for me was like, I realized I was working very, I felt they were very unadventurous, like, vanilla tunings and stuff. I still can't read music and everything, but I'm really starting to like, you know, I'm starting to experiment more with like chords and like finding something. I think I'd mentioned this like on Mastodon. I was like, oh God, I guess I'm gonna have to learn Max, or I'm gonna have to learn like, outside non-standard tuning, because I'd be like playing something and I'd be like, this chord almost works, but I'm trying to find something that's between this E and this E flat that isn't there.
Right.
And so it's like starting to work more with that, being more adventurous. But yeah, yeah, All Labyrinth is just interesting in comparison with like Overworld because it's older tracks, but they sound like they sound, they, I don't want to say newer, but I kind of infuse them with, what I've learned along the way. So for me, it's a nice comparison between the two. And I think the the last song on All Labyrinth, which is called The Labyrinth, is it's a different version of another song. I don't think I've released the other version yet. I'll have to look. But there were two versions, and I think I played one for you and some other folks on Mastodon, and that really helped me get a good sense of an outside perspective of what was going on. But it helped me kind of hone in more on what I was trying to do in the track. So much so that like instead of it being two versions of a track, it's like two tracks that are somewhat similar but um, very different paths to sort of get to the same place.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I know it's a little hard to kind of imagine without hearing both of them, but it's fascinating to do that. Something I wanted to do kind of is just take. I've kind of done it a little bit there with some other releases. Just take a set of things like finite samples, tracks, and like effects, and just keep building off of that. Almost like when you ask Chat GPT to like you see these pictures and that people are like redo the same picture 70 times and you see those regressions. But with a human you get far more variables and stuff. So when you keep refining the track like that, you just get I think if I'm in a good place and I'm able to keep myself open to experimenting and stuff, I can turn out some big kind of some very interesting variations on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
and you end up doing something unique by accident, which is, I think, when you are enjoying the process, it's going to be, how can it be anything except, from the person who's making it? I know it sounds like stating the obvious, but I remember when I was young, people kept saying, "Oh, this is so random, this music you're making," and I'm thinking, how can it be random? And even if it was, it wouldn't matter. Anything can be valid, but
were they using were they using random in the way that like it came out as a word my daughter started using it a lot when she was like 12? Oh, that's so random. And was it that sort of contemporary usage of it where it's just sort of like, oh, this strange thing pierced my world of top 40, the bubble of normalcy? Or was it because in that way, like, no, it's not. I mean, maybe it was, but I mean, go on with what you're saying, like when people would say that.
No worry, but I think they meant it more literally than that. And unless you're deliberately involving randomness in your process, it's what you're doing, for example, will be a child's sound. That question isn't even a problem really, because unless you're really self-consciously aping someone, it's not going to be anything except whatever the moment decides and your
Yeah.
creative impulses decide. And I don't know, I talk to young people who get very caught up on their sound,
Right.
and it's like, just enjoy the process.
Yeah.
It's bound to be, it's bound to at least be not random. I hear that word, I heard that word a lot more when I was younger than now. People don't say it so much. I think it's more a word where the patterns get very detailed, and because they're not falling on the grid lines that are expected,
Right.
That's the first assumption.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's said quite innocently, and sometimes it's said like, "This is complete crap." So,
Yeah, you get someone saying, "Oh, that's interesting," and
yeah, interesting is a good word.
you're
I
like,
remember
"I'm
I
like,
had that a lot.
I think you're spelling turn that off. It hurts my brain wrong. Like that's what you really want." But oh, you said something in there. Oh yeah, about aping and copying people. Like I just have to say, like years ago, I also write, and there was a great quote I read by John Irving or something where he says, every time I'm in between like working on a book, I start to work on my autobiography, and then I get bored with it, and I start to lie, and then I end up writing another. It ends up becoming the basis for another book, and I thought that was hilarious, and I started. I realized like I would do that when I would like cover somebody and like try to cover something like like there was a very distinct period for me in the early 90s where I was listening to a lot of like synth pop and industrial, so like Depeche Mode, but a lot of Cabaret Voltaire and Skinny Puppy and stuff, and I was really like transitioning to techno and how to make it. And my first exposure to techno was through Moby, who I went to high school with, and going to some of his shows and hearing his stuff. And it was very weird, like going to clubs and be with him and hear this club music, but then go home and I'm like, I want to make this stomper, like Skinny Puppy. But in that, I would copy people. I'd copy Aphex Twin. Like I think I tried to rip off the entirety of Selected Ambient Works or something. But I would get bored in those copies and then start to make shit up, and then I would end up like sort of creating, sometimes it'd be garbage, it'd be an absolute, pastiche, but other times I've like made something really new for me and really cool. And I still do that. Like sometimes I'll think, oh, this isn't working. Okay, well I want to try to sound like, how would Robert approach it, or how would Monolith approach it, or something else, and it's a little bit that phrase "fake it till you make it," but it's also like, yeah, fake it. Maybe you don't make it, but there's a tremendous amount of freedom in just allowing yourself to do these things and make them up and just have fun with it instead of like trying to develop your sound. If anybody were to ask, I'd be like, just listen and play, and just do that.
Yeah, listen carefully, exactly. And I love the freedom that you're speaking of, because you should be free to ape people if you want as well. I mean, I actually really like some so-called derivative music. You can find people who are obviously inspired by a certain group, and they sound like that, but
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that either.
No.
It can be really good, their music.
Yeah.
And I think people mistake not self-consciously trying to find a sound with not caring about it, but we both really care about what we're doing. And
yeah.
Why would you spend hours doing something a day when you could be doing lots of other things, unless you're taking like it quite seriously. But in it, you're not taking yourself seriously, because I don't think I'm that interesting. I think what's happening is interesting. And so it's a weird paradox. You're taking the whole thing really seriously, but you don't know what it is exactly. I mean, we still can't define what we're doing.
That's
no one knows what's
well
going on.
put.
Like, what is this thing called music anyway? I still don't know. I have some
but
ideas, they're probably wrong.
And I love that. Like, I love when like you or like on like Mastodon, Sean is in for one person particularly really said like, well, define music, or define reality or something. It's like oh, that's true. But yeah, it's like you're working this thing and you don't know what it is. It's this numinous thing, and you're kind of conjuring it out of whole cloth in a way, but at the same time, yeah, it's like if I love that moment when you're just sort of present to just fucking around and not noodling, but necessarily, but you're building this thing and you have it, in this inchoate shape, and you're like, oh, it could go anywhere, but then and it ends up in its final form, and you're like, wow, that's like either exactly what I wanted or it's totally different. Um, I, like I said before, I used to work very fast. I used to turn out, and when I was at my worst, I would turn out like 2, maybe 3 tracks a week, and of that, like let's say one was viable. But I was making like a lot of. I had like 100 songs one year by the end of the year.
Nice.
And that was, yeah, it wasn't a good year brain wise for me, but boy, musically it was awesome. But what I've been doing lately is forcing myself to really slow down my process and not painstakingly second guess every step, because I've done that. I've literally sat there at the keyboard and like, what is a song? Like, why do I want to hit that note? Why do I want to start on a B flat? Maybe E flat, maybe F. But why, And you get there and you've sat for an hour and done nothing but chewed all your nails off and, drank more coffee than you should. But when I'm in a good space, what I've been doing is like lately, um, working maybe on music a little bit in the morning, but at night I'll come down when the house is quiet and work on something for like an hour and just allow myself to just really experiment and play around with things, but let the process really let the process be the goal, not the finished song. Like, yes, at some point, I promised so and so they have an album, so I got to get them that. But really allow myself in the moment to let something unfold, um, and hear, allow it to come forward itself, because something I, I I tend, I don't make New Year's resolutions, but what I do is kind of at the end of a year and sort of in the beginning, I think about some sort of like, yeah, I do think of like, I guess they are resolutions, but I think about like something I want to work on. Like, and one year for something, it was actually 2 years ago, my big sort of resolution was to get out of my own way.
I
And
like that.
yeah, and well, the great thing was I'm still doing it. I still haven't figured out how to do it, but sometimes I've done it and it's been really wonderful that, I've, musically at least, I've allowed, like, I think what the true expression of what I'm getting at, and I'd like to think it's me there, but if it's divine inspiration or whatever, I think the true expression of like a song sometimes has gotten out, um, against my better judgment, maybe, but also, but because I'm employing that practice. Part of that comes from, there's a great, that documentary Sisters with Transistors, and Pauline Oliveros talks about her deep listening. And she says, I wrote it down somewhere. I really need to have it right in front of me, because she said something like, when I'm doing deep listening, I'm not listening to the sound. Something like, I know when she's like, I'm making music, I'm listening for what the sound wants to be. And that really, that's a big thing for me too, as a person, on sort of a spiritual level, is I really believe in allowing, through meditation or whatever, allowing yourself to arrive at a certain open space, where you're receptive to like whatever is coming in. And sometimes that can be sometimes it can just simply be beautiful nature. Other times it is a potent creative impulse or something. But just really kind of leaving yourself just, yeah, it really is. It's, I try to leave myself open and be a conduit, if that makes sense. I'm transmitting something from somewhere else. And
yeah, it does feel like that.
Yeah.
And
I
the
remember,
exciting thing
I
is
think
you
I've
disappear in a way.
Yes.
And that's my struggle with sort of the importance popular culture places on the artist, and everyone's talked about this stuff already, but it's the least exciting bit about music is the cult of personality
Yeah.
and the presentation. And yet it seems to have come to dominate people's thinking,
Yeah.
whether consciously or unconsciously. But when you're in the moment and music's making itself, it feels like you're simply taking part of a wider sort
Yeah.
of conversation. Or
Yeah, I think
and
it's
it really is
that's
amazing. It's magical,
it is.
mystical,
Yeah,
incredible.
it's when you're I think it's when you're tapping into the infinite. And I've I think a couple weeks ago I remember messaging you and I was like, you know, this is where God lives. This is, my idea of God is
I
probably
remember.
fairly different from other people, but I was like, this is where it is. It's like these things come together and I just allowed myself to be open, and these bits came in and they all came together and I'm like, it's that that creative urge and spirit. And but it really is that it's that allowing yourself to be open. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
I
And,
think we should be prosaic about the method and who we are. Like,
yeah,
don't make some ridiculous wall that no one can climb and make
yeah,
up. But on the other hand, in terms of the mystery of it all and the majesty and the feelings of otherness you get as you create,
yeah,
I'd like to elevate that in conversation. And
yeah.
but it seems to be the inverse. It seems to have gone the
Right.
other way somewhat.
I think, and part of that, I don't know. Some folks may not have necessarily a language or want to put those terms in words because sometimes folks feel. I think a lot of folks feel like the muse is this thing that passes by, like a rain cloud, and you have to hold out your bucket, and if you're lucky, you get a few drops. Whereas I believe kind of like the muse is, to a degree, it's like a muscle, and you have to develop skills so that you're sort of there, not necessarily, well, you're open to catching what it's giving you, but also you can channel it and
Yeah, absolutely.
and turn that energy, um, and harness that energy to a degree, that creative energy, rather than just waiting for it to hit you. What was it? It was Bach, or maybe I don't know who, but like they would sit down at the keyboard and pray,
Mm.
um, pray for a little while, and start playing. If they didn't like what they were playing, they'd stop, pray some more, play again, and eventually they'd come up with the music they were famous for. I don't necessarily do that, but I do. When I remember that, I'll take a pause and just think about, like, why was I sitting down here? What was that initial thing? And seeing
Mm.
if I can get back, to that, to take us to that, back to that place. Speaking of
Yeah.
that, with like your two latest albums, Brutalist and Regenesis, something I really loved about the two of them is, though I think you stated there's sort of a clear difference for you between the two of them. What I like is that they're almost sort of like opposite sides of the same coin, but it's sort of
Mm.
like, I don't know, there's the same face on either side, but if you hold it to the light, it's different. Because there's some lovely, beautiful, uplifting bits in Brutalist, but it's also a heavy record. Like, to me, it's a very greasy, dark, sort of reptilian thing. Like,
I like the
not
word reptilian there.
yeah,
That's good.
but not alien, but just sort of like you're working in a very, almost, like, there's like some very primordial things happening there that are also, you can find them in I find them too in Regenesis, but
Mm.
it's sort of like, it's almost like the two are resolved in two different ways. Were you like setting out with the two of these to kind of do that, make them flips of each other, or what were you thinking? What were you thinking, Robert?
Actually, there was a plan. I always conceived them as two albums. I
Yeah,
just didn't know who would want to put them out and when.
right.
Uh, and it feels like Regenesis actually follows from the end of Brutalist. So where the last track, the note that finishes on, it picks up at the beginning of Regenesis. I think actually you said that without me
Yeah,
telling you, which is really interesting. And it's hard to talk about your own albums, isn't it? Because as soon as you say anything, it like
well, I don't
fixes
know.
you.
I just went off for an hour about my own music, Robert. So
Yeah, I
maybe it's
enjoyed
hard for
listening to you. You're better at it than me. Um, there's a
my
lot of
wife
genetic
my wife tells me
feeling.
when we go into parties, she says, now listen, be interested, not interesting. And usually after 2 beers, I'm not interested, but I'm very interesting. But anyway, go on.
um, yeah, I always conceived of them in that way. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of work down the months in fine tuning
Sure.
the specifics, but and like you probably, I don't see things as reactions or separate, but that is a natural outgrowth of making music. Is if you've been doing one thing for a few years, your interest lay somewhere else. But actually, they were made at the same time as each other, so the reactions and responses were occurring within the same week often. I don't know about you, but I like having a bunch of projects on the go.
Yeah, I tend to have a few things happening at once. Yeah. Now, sorry.
To what you said earlier, I really like this idea of disciplining yourself into making. I think that's important. I know we were bigging up the feelings of inspiration and like when this heavy atmosphere comes in the room and takes you up. But there's a track called Radiant Machines. I don't normally remember details too well, but that one started as sheer hard work because I was feeling really down, various problems were going on. But I thought, no, I've learned that actually it's always worth making music because if anything, the less easily impressed you are with what you're doing, the more likely you are to come up with something that you'll enjoy later. Because you're in such a bad mood making it and nothing is working for you.
Yeah.
But you did, like you've been doing this 41 years, you're bound to come up with something usable at least, or does something salvageable, right?
Yeah.
And I only mentioned that track because it ended up being a really meaningful piece to me, and it was all about this decaying machine we call our body, which feels like it's falling to bits, still having this radiant aliveness to it, which I imagine you do too. I feel particularly strongly in the middle of making music. But it's kind of like funny the trajectory. It started as this is the worst thing I've ever heard. I'm hating every moment, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm going to discipline myself into doing this because
I've never said that.
I don't know why, just because. And then by the end, I was like a 5-year-old leaping around the room, really happy with in the process. So,
isn't that it's such a wonderful feeling, and I'm sure other people get it, but yeah, when something hits like that, you feel like, it's like Voltron or something, when all 5 machines come together and you're one greater. It's like, yeah, you're really connecting into that thing. That's amazing. Yeah, that's a beautiful track.
Thank you.
But so now, since you mentioned, I mean, yeah, we're both tinnitus sufferers. I know you sadly I have my own share, but you've had a pretty rough battle with it, and that's, I mean, do you want to talk a little? Can you talk a little bit about that? And like, because these things are pretty useful for helping you make music, from what I've figured out.
Right.
And when they're not, when they're generating their own horrid frequencies, it's like, I mean, how do you do so? Please, if you
I went to grab these. I have to wear them now pretty much whenever I go out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge, and I'm glad you're talking about it because I'm kind of evangelical about encouraging people to be a bit more careful than I was.
Good, yeah.
Although mine was made a lot worse by ear infections and microsuction. Be careful with microsuction. ENTs will try and get you to do it, but it gets pretty loud. When they like basically hoover your ears.
Yeah, I had that happen as a kid. And, I swear that made it worse.
Yeah, it's like 120 dB in there at times. So it's not quiet sound. I know they can change the level, but anyway, yeah, I've had tinnitus since 2020. It got worse in 2021 with the ear infections and microsuction, and then I had a weird, very intense virus which caused all kinds of other problems. But ironically, music making is still the one task I can do because I can control the volume in the studio, obviously, so it's actually the safest job. I tried listening to a doctor's advice and not wearing those things and living life like normal, and I got permanent worsening from them.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like once you've got an injured knee, you wouldn't run a marathon. You'd be a bit careful with it. So
Yes, my right knee agrees with you very much. It's like our 5K days are over, lad, and maybe a mountain climber too, unless you have a brace. But yeah, exactly. That yeah, I mean, and that's I'm so glad that you found that, at least in the midst of this incredible, pain and discomfort, that you're able to work in the studio despite that.
yeah, it has affected. Some of the effects have been maybe positive.
Hmm.
I don't want to underplay how severe it is at times, and
Yeah.
it's like it's called reactive tinnitus, and it varies without you can't predict what you'll get on any given day.
Right.
Have you got that too? Yeah, sleep seems to be the one resetter. So
Yeah.
when I go to bed at night, I'll wake up with a different sound. But beyond that, there's no way of controlling it or managing it particularly. And I think it was part of the drive to releasing more melodic. Well, to both of us, probably everything's melodic. What you were saying about percussion pieces earlier
Yeah.
rings true to me. I could see pitch and everything. So it's a moot point whether something's. But you know what I mean by the conventional understanding of like a top line.
Yeah.
And I started doing that when the tinnitus was particularly severe, because I thought, well, here's something I can revert to. Here's something that at least has a shape that requires less keen. You're not going to spend 6 hours on white noise on a track like
No.
I have done before when you've already got some issues there. So,
Yeah.
Organising tones in a more hierarchical and slightly more conventional way naturally outgrew tinnitus, as did the 16-bit stuff, because when you're using old sound chips, again, I don't think this is a compromise, because we all hear differently anyway. Even when I had the hearing of a 12-year-old, I heard so differently to other people according to cognition and all kinds of factors. So there's a grey area, whoever you are, and how much or however much you've damaged your hearing or haven't damaged it. We're all operating in this mysterious zone. No one's hearing absolutely perfectly, and
that's
I guess
astounding
I
to
took a
me.
wider gradient
Yeah.
once the tinnitus arrived. I thought, well, I'm going to afford a bit more of a wider girth rather than zooming into every frequency and getting mad obsessive. I'm going to allow some slightly broader strokes. Don't know if that makes sense. It's hard to explain, but it makes sense to me.
It does. I mean, I think, especially with this kind of, electronic ear-based music, you and I've talked about this, you can get, you know, people say, oh, well, it's not an orchestra and you don't have, 100 players and you don't have, your big book there with all your sheets. And then we're like, yeah, but you're constantly adjusting, like, micro adjusts of parameters that over time will build to a bigger thing. So like, yeah, like there's a complexity to it, but it's funny. I would never think of your music as not being anything but carefully, almost microscopically constructed. But I get what you're saying, where you were focusing on on broader, or maybe like a different concept than
I mean, this is all relative. Someone watching me now still find it ludicrous how long I spend on a hi-hat. I just mean, yeah. I suppose on a spectrum, I'm so not comparing myself to Beethoven in any way except for the hearing issue, in that he was able to write when nearly deaf, and he had boring tinnitus as well, which people forget.
That astounds me, like how he could do, and he just knew the music. I mean, I'm lucky if I hit an E flat and I'm like, oh wow, that's actually the note I wanted, but like, that's astounding to me that he could do that, and just, it was there and he knew it was there, but he couldn't, like, there was no, there's nothing like, Monet went blind and then painted water lilies.
That's it. I only laugh with delight because someone sent me that when they were trying to cheer me up.
Well, that's but so I mean, I really resonate with, like, just, your compulsion, or your impulse to compose even while you're experiencing that horrible, sound there. And yeah, for my I haven't done an official hearing test, but I did the AirPods hearing test, and
Oh yeah.
it said my ears are better than I thought,
Mm.
but I didn't suddenly go around listening to everything at 120 decibels. Like, I'm like,
No.
okay, I got to be careful about how I'm, make stuff and record it, which is interesting because I feel like for me, I'm working with much noisier sources than I have in the past, and noisier, like a lot heavier, louder drums and things like that. But so and that was kind of the thing that the not necessarily the physical conditions you're dealing with going into it, but I get it. Like you said, it was like that one song's about, which was the track name again? Forgive me.
Oh, radiant
Yeah,
machines. Mm.
like I mean, I so get that idea of just because you're being older and seeing certain things kind of like I said, my right knee, it's not gonna work the way it used to.
Ouch. Yeah.
Yeah, but or my ears aren't. But at the same time, these strange flesh and blood conglomerations are capable, not just me, but like are capable of like amazing things that we can do. Um, and did know so when you composed all these, I mean, did the two albums? Did you have them? Did you have an idea as like two separate albums initially, or were you as you were going along, you're like, oh wait, this kind of works for like the concepts behind Brutalist, and this kind of works for Regenesis, or maybe tell me and the listener, what sort of process there was in coming together with that. Maybe also I'll even say, like, how do you approach like putting together an album in general?
Oh, putting an album together. Yeah, that's the irony is I think Brutalist is the first time since Cognizance I've been actually happy with the album as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I like individual tracks from the other ones, but
Did you sequence it? I mean, do you spend a lot of time on that?
yeah, that took a long time actually. It started as a 4 hour long situation and then was
Wow.
whittled down to 2 hours. And actually, most of that material didn't go on Regenesis,
Yeah.
so it's there.
Unreleased.
Yeah.
I think you need to do a couple. You can do like those Otecker boys did with like Perlance and stuff. Several EPs. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that concept.
Wow. So four hours. I mean, how did you look at that? And can you see it? I mean, did you see it all as a clear arrangement? I mean, are you synesthetic, or like how does that look to you?
Yeah, you can visualize it, feel it, and with Brutalist, if I can use an image again, you're not necessarily consciously thinking these terms, but if you can imagine the building on the cover,
Yeah.
my wife actually took that picture in Hungary, but
Mhm.
the first half is like the structures more, and then you used the word reptilian earlier. The second half goes into the underground, and
The
I love the idea of a
subterranean.
descent. Sorry, what did you say?
I see the subterranean, the
Yeah,
underworld.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I like working from the detail out often, so it can start with field recording. I'm sure you do too. I have banks of field recordings that I've taken. It's hard to say though, isn't it? Because every track is quite different, and you're always exploring a new set of parameters and that's why it's fun. That's why it's a massive adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I can't remember a lot of making things.
Does any?
Do
Well,
you
let's.
find that?
Okay, I'll tell you.
If you get specific, I can get specific.
Yeah. Here's one, and I'm going to tell you. I'll be totally honest. Off of Regenesis, I got to go and I got to dig through to find it. Sorry, I found a box of David Sylvian CDs that someone sent me, and I just ripped them all. There's a lot of bootlegs, and so I have to dig through. Okay, track 3 off of Regenesis, Spectra. I have to admit, first listen, I did not like it, and I got really not annoyed, but I think at one point I was sitting there like, dude, Logan, what the hell are you thinking, man? Jesus. But I went back and later on listened, um, And I was like, oh, this is this is crazy. Like this is amazing. Like how? So talk about like something like Spectra. And if you need to pause and like open up the DAW file, go right ahead. But tell me like something like that. Like how did that progress? Because that's an interesting one. Because it's like it's a lot of like numinous, and it doesn't seem like there's much happening for a long time.
Yeah, that one is actually the track Regenesis. It's Guts taken out, and then I did a lot of processing where I isolated the transients,
Oh
the,
wow.
or the noise elements, and then reformatted those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the vocal, it was built from, they're not actual vocal samples, but I modeled some vocal-like sounds. I used that plugin that I'd be banging on. Well, it's not a plugin actually. That that I forgot what it's called. This is dreadful.
Is
The
it
Arc
TS?
Lab.
Is it? Oh, is it from Earcam?
Yeah, that's right.
Is it
Can't quite get
TS
the
or
name
something? Is
right.
that the one?
That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, yeah. I immediately after you mentioned that on the chat on the album, I immediately went to Earcam's site and I'm like, please, it's on sale right now. If it's $54, I can get it, but if it's full price, I gotta wait. But yeah, so that's so you really, I really like to hear that you do like a lot of processing stuff like that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I did use that a lot there. It's some people went. My friends went and got it after I talked about it
Yeah,
and found it quite weird because it doesn't give you much. You need to obviously drop the
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
in there and do a lot of automating and get detailed,
Henry,
get busy with the
yeah,
MIDI. Except that's not MIDI, but
yeah.
I have to say busy with the MIDI.
I think I said something like I expect to open it up and it's going to be like Xenakis mixed with like a beat making thing or something, and it really isn't. It's you actually have to do the work yourself, which really one should be doing. Even in this age of AI everything. But well, you obviously turn some really you turn some really impressive tones out there with it, like with doing that. And is like that song is like is it is it super layered, is it super dense, or is it very simple like Spectra? Is it just like
Yeah,
eight tracks
it's
and
pretty layered. But in the case of that one, I didn't want it to sound like it was. Uh, it was to feel like it was all from the same organism or room, if you like. But there's a lot of layers as usual. I understand this whole filtered down minimalist sound, minimalist slash maximalist.
yeah
That tendency, especially in pop now, or maybe I'm 10 years out of date, but maybe coming from an orchestral background, I still love hearing a lot of interactions between parts,
yeah
and
yeah
I, I tend towards that, and I like you said earlier so well. It's really lovely to listen to an album by someone and to discover something new each time.
yeah
I know everyone says that, but it's absolutely true.
yeah
I
and
really
it's
hope
funny,
that
it's you can't just like go out and make music like that directly. Like you can't say, I'm going to make a multifaceted gem that will thrill people for decades. It's like sort of you accidentally happen on it. And if you're lucky and you're there as, like I said earlier, as the conduit, like you're privy to like this really cool thing. But I forgot what I was going to say with it, but I interrupted you again.
Oh no, you didn't. I'm curious. Are there any others where you thought, what's going on here?
Oh
What's
yeah,
he thinking?
most of them. But yeah, and the reason why it's most of them is because like I really, I think it's because you have that. I keep saying like classical training, but you do have a bit of basis in them. If your father was playing you, symphonies and stuff at age 4 with headphones, like it's funny. My folks did that, but my father also played me an Edgar Varese record when I was 6, and it scared the
Nice.
shit out of me. Yeah, my dad, for being a very conservative guy, not like gross conservative, but pretty conservative, um, whose favorite albums were, he was a conservative guy, but his favorite albums, he worked for Barclays, were Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Donovan's Greatest Hits, like two of the most acid drenched albums from the 60s. And he loved that. And then, yeah, like he had Edgar Varese. And I was like, what the hell? But um, like let's see, I mean, I'm looking at Riser.
Oh yeah.
Riser is like, I don't know if it's onomatopoeia, but it really does have that feeling of rising, and yet, and other people were picking up on this on the what do you call it, on the album
Maybe.
listening party chat, was that each sort of rise in it was like, it almost opened up like a fractal in a way, or sort of, sort of like almost the box from Hellraiser, or something really complicated like that. Not that your music is like Hellraiser, but something like that, like Riser. Maybe talk a little bit more about that, because it's interesting. It's so beautiful, and so I'm like, oh man, he named it Riser, but it rises. It's not obvious, but it's really cool. But like, so how did, like, it was really beautiful track in the midst of a lot of beautiful tracks.
That's very kind and encouraging. Thank you. You're much better at describing my intentions than me.
That's because I talk way too much, Robert.
that was exactly as you said. I love. Weirdly, it's not a perfect album by any means, but you know that Mike Oldfield album. I heard it as a kid, Incantations, and I think he took that from Steve Reich and Philip Glass. This same technique of something being like it's ever growing, ever rising.
Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with it, so maybe explain it.
It was the first time I only mentioned it because that was the first time I'd heard it, and I fell in love with that concept ever since. But you've got the MS-20, right?
Yes.
Yeah, most of that track was playing these rising lines on the MS-20 live, and then just layering it up. And
I should say I have the MS-20 plugin.
Oh.
But in my defense, I played the MS-20 that was owned by Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. A good friend of mine is he lived in Boston for a while. We made music together. He tracked helped, he was an engineer on one Aerosmith album, and Steven Tyler sold him his MS-20 and the vocoder.
Oh yeah, yeah. I forgot what you call it.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But he sold them those, and I'm like, oh my god, is there cocaine in the key bed? But anyway, so yeah, the MS-20 is fascinating. Like it you realize how, like, so many great synth songs have been made, like with everybody from Kraftwerk to, like, I don't know, Daft Punk or something. Just how wild it is. But so that song, so it's built on the lines of that, and just
I mean, obviously the drums. I think I reprogrammed something from my friend's drumming. He's called Frank Bing. He owns SLOWFOOT Records.
Oh, cool.
On that note, they didn't like that track.
Really?
Yeah, they hated it for some reason. I love SLOWFOOT. I don't mean anything.
Yeah.
But
did you have to
he
fight?
doesn't like anything like that I do. So I sat on it for a while, and I thought, oh, this fits Regenesis really perfectly, and thankfully EVEL were positive about it.
Yeah,
so
he liked that one. Yeah,
that's probably his drumming. I can't remember. Do you do that? Like reuse people's performances, because of course you just anything's malleable.
Yeah.
You only need the raw data. Of course, sometimes you want to capture a performance and keep it, but yeah,
it's interesting. It's interesting to, like, be. I kind of personally, I mean, I'd be horrified if I found out someone had illegally, or without my knowledge, like remixed or done something with, or sampled like a big portion of one of my songs. But then again, like, I'm kind of the mind that, like, almost any sound is there for the taking, but kind of coming from, like, my love of collage and stuff like that. But obviously copyright issues ensue. But I really like that thing you said about taking other performances and you repurpose them and resample them or something. And
exactly. I mean, they have to be, for me they have to be personally linked.
Right.
I've only sampled other music once, and not that there's anything wrong with it. Of course, it's as a whole. it's a whole art form, it's a whole history. But
Yeah.
If it's a fringe musician, normally they're fine with it, and
Yeah.
it feels quite different.
Yeah, I try not to advertise, try not to sample stuff that's too obvious. But once in a while, I've had some things where I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I sampled that.
Have you got caught yet?
No. And it's funny because just, not to talk about me again, but me, but that guy I mentioned, the guy who owns the MS-20, we did some songs together. And we haven't released them, and I think I played them for you and some other folks on Mastodon. And really, they loved them as much as Brian and I did. But in one song, we used some samples of Number Station recordings. Mm. And now, when he and I worked on that, was like 20 years ago. And I don't know if you remember. So there was the CD of recordings of Number Stations came out called the Conet Project, and it was the first time anyone compiled them. This really great weird CD. The band Wilco sampled one of the tracks for the song Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, and they got sued by the guy who owns the Conet album, and it sued the pants off of them. Then, like a year, and so Brian was like, "Nope, we can't use this without permission. We got to get it." And I'm like, "Dude, this is like a small label in England. They might not even be around." He's like, "No, we got to." And so we sat on them for ages. And then the guy released all the recordings to the public, and now there's no copyright issue. But I forget why I was talking about that. But it was interesting, like that repurposing. Like that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot my point, but it was just an interesting little aside to it. But like,
I think it's asked you if you got found out ever.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So that's the closest. No, nobody's found out about the other ones, which are glaringly obvious. And I get like it's when I hear somebody's sampled something, obviously I get way up on my high horse, like, oh, you sampled Otecker, ZZ Top. Meanwhile, like I got a song that I sampled from Can. I'm not proud of it, but it's out there. I can't stop it. It's too many years gone, but it's there. What I want to look through these other stuff and see. I don't want to. I really like the at the end of Regenesis, that there's really a very solid connection of like not just a progression of sound, but sort of a concept going from like veiled earth, children of rust, clouds fade, out of the womb into the tribe, and outer darkness. Like there's a beautiful like a sense of transition and dare I say regenesis happening at that point at the end of that album. Maybe can you say, was there riff on that? Was there a specific idea in that, or was it
Yeah, you're really good at picking up on these things. It's lovely.
Oh, thanks. Once in a while.
I'm listening. Definitely. Also, in terms of the harmonic interplay, really sequencing that so there's a maximum emotional feeling, and conceptually they do link exactly as you said. And again, it's hard to say anything because do you find that as soon as you say one thing, it's like you're saying that's what it's doing, what it is, and it's kind of
and it's like
not entirely true.
Yeah, it's not. Yes, yeah. I'll have. I think it's funny because I think I have very much. I'm sure we all do, but I very much have my own internal sort of language and ideas about how things operate. It's funny. I say I have synesthesia, but then I hear about somebody else's and I'm like, oh, I'm doing synesthesia wrong. But I do see my music as like, even before I started doing stuff on DAWs, I saw it as colors and certain shapes. But yeah, so like when you're explaining, it's like, oh, actually, no, it's not at all like that. But well, let me ask you this. So like, so in this day and age, people don't, probably because of just how the media, is put together. We absorb things as like digital files, not so much as like albums. For me, and I think it's because I grew up listening to like, albums and you had to flip them, or tapes, you had to flip them. the sequence is very important. And
Yeah.
each album, like I go over, I have a sequence and I'll send it to two or three different people. Say, listen to this. Do you think this is right? And I have my one friend Jay, who is like I call him the secret ear because he really has a good sense of like my music, but music in general. And he says, no, you got to put them together in a different way. Were these two albums like maybe like what was sort of the idea of sequencing them, and maybe what was there an overarching idea of like Brutalist is going to do this and Regenesis is going to do this? Like, was there two different? Talk about the sequences.
There was. I think Brutalist has less arcs, and it's a very different pacing. And because Regenesis involves some more equal temperament and harmony, I could do quite.
Did I hear a rumor there was a minor C chord in there somewhere?
Yeah, one of them's got C major, which is
it's okay.
Oh my God.
It's okay. As Stephen King said, we all got to spread our legs creatively in the back seat every once in a while. So,
but that obviously enables you to have tracks talk to each other and connect to each other in ways that are a bit more immediately satisfying. But there's nothing wrong with it. So a lot of the time, the track will finish in a key that the next one picks up, or it's the relative fifth.
Something I just something I just thought of with Brutalist is like it's a long album, which doesn't bother me because I've made some pretty long albums. I've literally said to labels like, what, half an hour? That's an hour and a half. That's not that long, you know. And then I look at like Computer World, and you know it was 37 minutes, and I'm like, that's like 2 of your songs. But anyway, like, in terms of how do I put this point here? Brutalist, something about it, the word grinding kept coming up a lot. Grinding and driving. Like, from me, my listening is like, I got the sense of like, okay, you know, you're like, I'm Robert, I'm your tour guide. We're going places. They're not going to be necessarily pretty. I'm going to take you through some things. Like, I really felt like, not that I was put through my paces so much so, but that like there was a conscious, you know, conscious. It seemed like there was like a sort of procedure, like not necessarily that I was being, you know, guided and dragged through the track's progression, but like, you know, you're like, well, I know where I'm going and you're going to follow me, and hopefully you pick up along that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Have you heard The Rite of Spring?
Yeah, but not in a long time.
Okay. Wait, who is that? That's not. I'm absolutely not comparing myself to Stravinsky or The Rite of Spring, just to make that this clear. But again, I think a lot of our childhood experiences are super formative, and what listening to that as a kid, in the way it relentlessly it takes no prisoners.
Yes.
I don't think everything always has to be that way, but there's something really attractive about a relentless, combustive force that says you're going to get on this train and you can enjoy it or not. And some people, I know this because I've tried playing it, some people, 2 or 3 tracks in are like, what on earth is going on? This is what you're doing here.
Yeah.
So if you don't like it, it's not going to be perhaps particularly enjoyable, but I'm not saying it's even that hard, by the way. To me, it's really fun to listen to.
Yeah.
I'm just going by, as you probably do, you play things and you're surprised.
Mm-hmm.
For example, people might call what you do dark, and you think, that was the last thing on my mind. I was in a really good mood.
Yeah, I was thinking about puppies. Like, well, how does that, you know? Yeah. Do you find often that, I mean, how often do you find that you have a particular concept of like the setting or the, you know, sort of the mood or the color of a song or whatever, and that other people, like, do people get it, or like, are they just way off, or are they just, you know?
Everything you said has been like, wow, you jumped on my head.
Well, really... I'm a weirdo, Robert, so I sit in my basement poring over things with the mouse like, if I move it a millimeter, it's going to be...
Tell me about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Half a oh fuck,
Howard.
yeah. It's like you're like like that meme, like the girlfriend's like guy and girl lying in the bed, and girl's like, I bet he's thinking of other women, and the guy's like imagining an Ableton fader, and he's like, if I move it, maybe the snare won't suck if I drop it half a dB. But do you find like, I mean, okay, outside of fellow weirdos like me, and you're a weirdo, but in the good way, best way possible. Like, are normies like getting it, or do any like come through and are like, whoa, like,
I really want them to enjoy it, and I don't see why it should be exclusive to anyone. I'm not trying to sound virtuous. I really think that it could be enjoyed by anyone,
yeah.
and
I
it's
don't
probably
think
more
I
a
don't think you're
case of
virtuous. Yeah,
them being it's just exposure. How much have you been exposed
yeah,
to a certain sound? And so it seems like a weird tangent, but I got this pet peeve with nature documentaries and how they've always got the same bombastic orchestral score accenting the
yes.
animals.
Yes, and that's
And
the thing I was saying earlier about cues is like, okay, here's the clarinet motif that's, curious, playful little kits. And then here's
yeah,
the kettle drums coming in when the elephants stomp on the gator or something like that. Like, yeah.
exactly. I was talking to a director and he said what probably happened was it did work once, and I have no doubt at one time that was quite interesting, but now it's become the go-to vernacular. And once people realize, I think, that this is a valid option and
Yeah.
it's not scary and people out there actually enjoy it,
Yeah.
I think anyone could get into this stuff. Your stuff,
Yeah,
my stuff, all
very
this.
much so. It's not as,
Take the opposite, but
yeah,
yeah.
it's not. I mean, I definitely have some things that are difficult. They're loud. Like, years ago, I had a song called "Permanent Crisis," and I'd been listening to a lot of Panasonic. I call them Panasonic. I refuse to call them Panasonic. Panasonic. And I remember playing it for my mother, and she's like, I can't handle this. It's too much. And she's like, what is the name of that song anyway? Like, you know, car accident? And I'm like, no, it's called Permanent Crisis. Well, why would you call it that? I was like, well, I wanted to make people anxious. Well, why would you want to do that? Like, and I think to what you're saying, it's like, I think all, musicians, obviously you have a different perspective on making music because of just, we know how the sausage is made, but I realize like we have just a very different perception also too of like what we listen to and what we like, and just that yeah, other people 9 times out of 10 are not out there trying to expose themselves to like newer, deeper, different things, but are just like, music is, we had this conversation a little bit on Mastodon. Music is just sort of, it's just there, it's background, like, someone makes it, like, not, someone has to make a living from it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. You've hit on lots of interesting points. There's these strange channels on Instagram and other places where they see themselves as defenders of culture,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll pick on some avant-garde piece and mock it. And granted, they do choose the most extreme moments of the most extreme examples.
Yeah.
But it's like, if it's not pretty, if it's not conventional beauty, if it's not relaxing, if it doesn't make you dance, fill in as you see fit, then it's not valid.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that seems to have infiltrated a lot of thinking, probably subconsciously. And it's hard to explain why it is valid where someone has presented you with these options,
Yeah.
other than it thrills you, and
Yeah.
they either have to believe you there or not believe you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And you realize that, like, a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I have my blind spots, but I think you realize a lot of people have a very specific idea of what music is like and how one makes it, what one does with it. And escaping that, like, when you put people outside of their comfort zone by making them listen to, like, song of yours, you realize that, like, wow, like, I don't know. For me, two things happen. I realize, one, maybe my taste is not as pedestrian as I think it is. I do think I'm very pedestrian, but then I'm like, a friend of mine is like, no one plays like a band playing coca leaves from Peru in the 1960s and then goes to like, pump up the jam or something like seamlessly, like, and that's like those two things can exist in the same world. I'm not saying that because I'm so cool and I have a broad music taste, because I don't. I have some very narrow palate in some regards, but do you, I mean, for instance, for me, like I said, I didn't play my music for people very much for about 12 years because I was terrified that I would be seen as like, you know, hack, bad, or whatever. And then what I started to do was force myself to play it for people who I knew had never heard anything like it, just to see their reaction. And sometimes that'd be my parents. Like I played Amber for my parents. Like, that's not my album, obviously, but I played that, and they loved every song until the very end, until Tear Tear. And then that was like my mom was like, "Why would someone make this? It's so anxious," you know. But like other stuff they would love, or like I played an album of mine. I gave it to a the secretary of like the CEO at the very top of this Fortune 500 company, and I gave it to her. I was like, "Yeah, play it for your kids." And she went home. Cheryl was like, "It was interesting. I didn't really like it, but my boys loved it." And it's like her twin 5 year old boys. I was like, "Aha! I got to remember them and add them to the mailing list." But do you do you ever do that? I mean, do you kind of put it out there intentionally, thinking like they may not get it, but you want to hear what their reaction is, or
like you, I didn't show anyone any music from about 2010 to 2015 when Flesh came out. So I can relate to that. And I think it's the health concerns where I thought, which led me to think, oh, I better put something out because we don't know how long we have. I don't mean this in a dark way,
yeah,
but we don't know how
no,
long we
we
have.
don't. It's reality. It's not dark.
And it felt better out than in, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah,
get it out there, and perhaps someone will. Because it's really arrogant to think that what excites you. It's really arrogant to think your brain is so unique that only you're gonna get a kick out of this.
yeah,
There has to be, surely, unless you're literally an alien, and even then,
yeah,
we probably share some characteristics. But
yeah.
so I figured somehow someone else. Again, that seems to imply I think it's really, really strange music, and I really don't.
Yeah.
But when you've had some negative feedback, when you have enough of that, it does start to feel a bit unanimous. And I went through a period of showing my music to all the wrong people. I don't know if I was like that for punishment or what I was thinking, but maybe I was so naively, blissfully. Maybe I so fully believe this idea that it's for everyone that
Yeah.
and I got a lot of reactions like, "Is this even music?" And maybe you probably wouldn't react this way because you're a bit. I was very sensitive, and I took it the wrong way, and I thought, well, I'm just going to keep making
I'm very sensitive. I am thin-skinned. It's taken a lot of work not to appear that way, but oh boy, no. That's why I didn't play anything for people for 12 years. I was just convinced, like, you know, it was crap. But yeah, no. So being that sensitivity. Sorry, I interrupted you, but like.
No, you didn't. It's all good. I realized in order to protect this continuing, I should be a bit more careful and discerning.
Yeah.
And I noticed too, my father, his music's brilliant, and he would be greeted with a lot of confused faces at Christmas. He would play his latest. It's a much more classical type of composition. It was notated in those cases. And he didn't enjoy that either. It's not actually that fun to sit in a room with a lot of mystifying people. I don't really get a kick out of it. Some people do, but
it's interesting. I do enjoy some of that because I forget. Do you have other siblings, or I know you have?
No, you see, I'm a weird only child, so that's probably.
Oh, that's okay. My daughter's a weird only child, and my dad was a weird only child, so I get no. But like, I'm the youngest, and I grew up for a certain amount, struggling for attention when my older brothers were getting it. I do have somewhat of a perverse joy in like kind of putting people through something when they weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
But I don't continually do that because it's not. Well, one thing I realized was it's not my job to like open other people's horizons, broaden them necessarily. But what you were saying, like you were playing, you realize you were playing it for the wrong people. What I learned was like, like I had to play my music for people, but I started to choose. Sometimes I would just give it out willy nilly and see what happened. But I started to choose like what I thought were like good venues or just good ears, and and over time I found some people who were like, who could give me good constructive feedback, or just good feedback, and I wouldn't, um, and I wouldn't get offended. A pair of friends of mine were DJs, and they had, if something sounded a little too much like Otecker, they would say, "Oh, this track of yours is a little Booth and Brown, don't you think?" And that just killed me because it was the most hilarious, withering insult. But
It could be wrong though, right?
oh yeah, they could
Sorry,
be
I
wrong.
cut
Like,
you off. But...
no, it's okay. Like, they could be wrong, but also they're funny. Like, when people would say that stuff, it's funny. A friend of mine, like, I have a series of, I want to do like a series of covers in the new year of, like, some favorite songs, like, over the, and not, not Chang sings the hits, but, some interesting stuff, like some New Order. And I sent, I sent my friend Jay, who, literally, like, he's the guy who gives me, like, final okay on album sequences and stuff. Like, I really run everything through him. um, I played him one of these covers, and he said, "Oh, isn't that cute? What are you going to call the album? Boy with Ukulele?" And there was no ukulele on it. I was dying. And actually, in honor of him, I am actually going to call the album Boy with Ukulele because it's so goddamn funny. But, like, I think you realize over time, it's like you're putting this out for folks in the world, but you sort of have to choose your venues. But you do want to be a little, it's hard to be sensitive and not be thin skinned, but also you don't want to be cut off. You don't want to be shut off from being able to either receive praise or criticism. I'm not perfect at it by any means. I have my days where I'm just like, someone looked at me funny, and like, my album isn't bad. What do you mean? You know. But I have other days where people say, "Oh, it doesn't do it." I'm like, "Oh, that's fine. You don't have to get it. You don't have to like it." One of my favorite things in the world was a friend of mine. I said I didn't like the last season of Stranger Things, and they really loved it. And they said to me jokingly, "It's like, that's okay. A lot of my friends have bad taste." And one of my favorite things was turning around and using that phrase right on him about something. And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's okay." He said he didn't like, I think, like Else Q or something, the Otecker album. And I'm like, "That's okay. I have a lot of friends with bad taste." And he's like, "Hey, wait a minute." And I'm like,
That's mine. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, it is just interesting, like, playing your stuff for people and putting it out there.
A lot of that's to do with their narratives in terms of what is apparently valuable
Yeah.
to. What I mean is, one thing I tried for a period, I didn't play live as much as I should have, but if there was a grand piano at the venue,
Mm-hmm.
I would always start with an improvised piano piece.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was conceptually holistic. Like, there was a reason musically to do that. But one side benefit was that a lot of people who had been offended and maybe written it off if it started with the electronic ends were won over initially, and then they actually were open-minded for the rest of the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
And I found that really interesting. It's like, oh, now you've demonstrated to us that you know how to do this, what we consider proper, and so we'll be open to the rest.
Yeah, you've shown us your bona fides, so we'll entertain your little diversion.
And thankfully, that was part of the sound of the whole set, but it also made me a bit sad that that should be necessary. And I guess that's just a given that people can give criteria in regards to.
That's. I mean, I think there's with almost anything there's a certain amount. I mean, I think music, and I think maybe film too. There's a certain amount. You really do have to sort of soften people up to a certain degree.
That's a good way of putting it.
And not. I mean, I know some, like, I talk about them a lot, but because they're probably the group I listen to the most, Otecker. Like, I mean, they're at a point where it's just like they don't do that, and they're doing their thing, and I think that's one of the great things about them that I admire, especially that last, Ask Otecker or anything on the kiosk website. They said, just keep doing what we want. Like, Sean's like adamant, like, I make my music for myself, and if other people like it, that's great. I think they've obviously worked and they've put in the time so they can do that. But for me, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like I have to necessarily massage an audience and get them ready and receptive. but I think there is a certain amount of like you said, like that, I think it's good. You do those things where you have something and like you introduce someone, and it brings them in from perhaps that side, their awareness of that part of your music, and then they accept this more experimental bit. I mean,
Yeah.
do you hear a lot of people saying, yeah, like I came for the piano and stayed for the micro adjustments in TS, like, or T2?
Yeah, I got that all the time when I was. I must admit, in my released music, I've never done anything like that. Maybe to my destruction, I just put out exactly what I believed in from
Yeah.
them. But all the time, people would hear me fiddling on the piano doing something pretty and say, "Why can't you just make music like that?
Why can't you make nice songs? Yeah, that's
You
yeah.
make nice things. What are you doing?" It was very, especially your land. Actually, if I went to America, um, maybe you see it the same way though. I see it as all the same thing. There's no, like, genuinely, if it's interesting to you,
Yeah.
there is no. This is going to sound really sacrilegious, but you can listen to Enya and then Stockhausen,
Yeah.
and you get lost in Enya's. The reverbs on those. I don't really like anything after the first few albums, but there's some beautiful. There's nice harmonic interplay. There's some pretty
Oh well,
reverbs.
she was. Yeah, I mean, she's a brilliant composer. I haven't listened to them closely, probably in ages, but I will now. Just if you mention that, but yeah, like yeah,
It's
um,
all. It's all. It all makes total sense to you, and
yeah,
you're exploring pitch relationships. It just so happens that sometimes they're a bit more microtonal than other times.
yeah.
Sometimes they're mixed in with a whole bunch of other noise information. Um,
It's on that. I think from an early age, um, I would play like friends of mine. Like I grew up with a lot of friends who were really into like classic rock, and back then it was new, like Rush of the 1980s and Van Halen and stuff, and the new wave synth pop stuff I played that just didn't get it, and they were like,
Interesting.
oh, if it wasn't questioning their sexuality, it was like, oh, they can't play, and saying someone like Prince can't play, and because he wears purple, he's gay is like it's like my God,
They say they can play. That's crazy.
yeah.
That's
Well, and at age 14, I didn't have the facility to say like you're a fucking idiot. Like, listen, but like I realized that like people were hearing. Well, it's not. People are coming from their point of view, and people are hearing things based on sort of their experience and what they like, obviously, and filtering. I mean, I know there's some conversation like that a bit on Mastodon. Playing and listening to stuff from their filters, but it made me realize just how much like that that it just well music I would play stuff for musicians, and musicians were I realized they were closed off, and
mm.
that like their training had prevented them or whatever from like seeing the value in something like telecommunication by Flock of Seagulls is not a technically great song, but it's a great fucking song.
I know what you mean.
It's good solid rock and beat and everything, but the fact that they're not playing it in fucking 13/8 on a 9-string guitar drop down, to like an obscure tuning system and that Hildegard of Bingen, didn't use because it was too like that stuff, people get um, like it's just like listen to it, and that's that going way back to what we were saying about the creator of FM synthesis and listening to like music is ear based, like
Yeah, it does
that's
go back.
and my favorite thing is like reading like saying Rush again. Like I think a lot of people don't know that I'm a big fan of Rush. Not like I haven't seen them 70 times or anything, but I love some of their albums and I think they're all amazing. But like it amazed me to hear, oh yeah, that Rush listened to the very bands that my friends, um, said I was gay for listening to, like Ultravox
Mm.
and Prince and Depeche Mode. Meanwhile, they're listening to all that stuff and they're like, oh, this is cool. Like they were getting into like the new music.
Mm.
Um, and then of course, you find that like they find Stuart Copeland came from like a background of hearing a lot of big band stuff, and jazz and other people do, and they all, it all comes together, and it all, like you said, it's all, I think, sort of all connected, and all,
Yeah.
and you're hearing it, and so there really is no, yeah, like there's no difference for me to listening to like I've been, I pick a particular song to listen up to every day when I wake up. For the last couple of years, I've done it, and it's
That's
very,
lovely idea. I should do that.
it's really wonderful because it really sets the tone. But you got to be careful. Like the first year I started doing it, I it was a song called 81B by Joy Orbison. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Really pretty, just slow moving electronic song. Really nice. The next year it was Love in Outer Space by Sun Ra, which is this beautiful 3/4 da 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 da, and that was great. And then, but then, so like recently, what I've been listening to when I get up is Down Low by Freak Nasty, which is 140 BPM, Florida booty bass. I obviously don't play this out loud in front of my wife because she probably throw the speaker out the window. But stuff like that. But it's just so funny to like, I'll sort of listen to that stuff and then I'll be like, oh, that reminds me of something that that was going on. Oh yeah, and like and there was like a Jan Hammer song, that one that was floating around. It was beautiful. That Don't You Know? I forget what my original point was, but like, yeah, finding that there's there really is beautiful stuff happening in in music, as long as you're open to it and listening to it. Like I
Yeah.
also I don't like a lot of modern country, but um, I love like classic country.
I do too, actually. I got an education in that. A friend took me to the mountains in Georgia, and we saw some country players. And most of the songs have three chords, as you do, but of course it's the inflections within the timings, the expression. And actually, I saw a weird connection between country music and techno in that it was fairly faceless. Like,
Yeah,
they were very formal. There was none of the "I'm an artist" vibe. It was they couldn't decide what song they were going to do next. They involved the audience. It's very low key, and
yeah,
the music shone in that way. I think a lot of what you're saying also connects with, you mentioned kids earlier, and my dad was a primary school teacher, and he would hit them with anything: Venetian snares,
oh wow,
Aphex Twin. You mentioned Autechre. He played Autechre, and I actually played some concerts there.
Oh fun.
And this is just anecdotal evidence, but you'd notice that the younger kids were fine with anything,
Yeah,
and I would do pretty extreme music. Again, to us, it's just music. It's not, there's not some weird hierarchy, but
yeah.
But
I lost you, but you're coming back. I'm waiting for it. There he is. Wait.
can you hear me?
Now you got you. Yep.
What? I've got all squashed.
Oh yeah, I know. You're looking.
Maybe my camera doesn't like my point here.
What's
Sorry,
weighing you
camera.
down? No.
I can't fit my camera.
If you squeeze the sides of your laptop, then
Come on. What is this? This is brilliant.
it's
Anyway, I'll talk like a squash.
But no, so, but you were saying the kids like of a certain age would dig what you were doing, and
right. And I'm not trying to form a story after the fact, post-rationalize. It really was a literal trajectory. Once they hit 10 or 11, and it's natural, you get more self-conscious.
Yeah.
But I think what we're after is a mix between being incredibly childlike and almost innocent and naive, where you draw on everything, you enjoy everything, but of course you don't do away with all the knowledge you've accumulated, and it is really enjoyable to dissect sometimes and trace cultural histories and to take note of forms that have emerged and respect them and honor them at certain times.
Yeah.
But I don't want that to be my master, and I'm sure you don't either. You can slip into that glove when the time calls for it, for appropriate artists.
Yeah, for your appropriate expression. And then I lost you again. But I get what you're saying. Like, it is a balance between finding, yeah, keeping like an openness, I think that you have as a child, and um, keeping that openness, but at the same time, like um, using your technical skill. For some reason, like what you said reminded me of. Um, I'm a huge fan of like the the Ethiopian jazz, like the Ethiopiques
Oh gosh,
series.
yeah, absolutely.
Mahmoud Ahmed, like
Yes.
uh, a guy loaned me a Mahmoud Ahmed CD, and he almost beat me up to get it back, which is funny because he was about 5'1". But I just, it's like it truly was the voice of God to me, and that stuff is so amazing because it's Western instrumentation, but on a very ancient African like scale and time time signature. Um, and something that is really interesting from that, you touched on it earlier, and I'm not sure if I'm totally going to get it right, but I think we were talking about people listening to stuff, and not cultural appropriation, but like picking up influences. But a lot of bands, a lot of groups, came out from that sort of. I think from there was a lot of that stuff happening in the early 2000s of music coming in from non-Western sources. I don't want to say world music, and you would hear Western music reflected back, like the Ethiopian stuff, or like Fela, for instance. They were listening to Fela was listening to like James Brown and a lot of Motown and stuff, but he was putting like um, his own Nigerian stamp on it. There's this group, the Budos Band, who I love, who are from Brooklyn, and they all look like they're on work leave from a halfway house. Like they all look kind of scary, like they're all out on their own recognizance with a GBH, a charge or something, and yet they make this beautiful music that's a mix of like rock, American rock and R&B and like heavy rock, but the Ethiopian stuff, and they have this big horn section and brass section, but with a lot of funk in it too. And it's this whole new sound, like a whole different thing from these very different sources, but metabolized and ingested to come out on the other end in this really amazing unique mixture.
That,
That always fascinates me when people can do that. Just come up with the stuff, and you're like, "What were you doing?" Like, you
yeah.
came up with this, and like, what were you thinking? Like, and I think, do you? I don't know. I had, but maybe I don't know if you did. You know, like there was a musician, Hazel Adkins, very much an underground artist musician. He grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, like in either Kentucky or West Virginia. He grew up listening to the radio. And because he was isolated and everything, he grew up thinking that the music he was hearing on the radio was made by one person. And it could be a full band, or it could be, a small like rock combo. So he learned to play the guitar and the drums at the same time and sing. He wasn't good at it necessarily, but he did his own thing. I'll find you a link. But Hazel Adkins, Hasiladkins, and he got out there on the road and he'd play, and he'd be like, who all you doing in the band? Why you need all these guys? There's five of you. And they're like, well, I'm the bassist, he's the guitarist, he's the drummer, and that's the singer. He's like, well, I do all that myself. And I just love things like that where I think I have affinity for that personally, because as a kid I was terrified of I was a very anxious kid, looking bad or looking stupid, and I would make up these furtive like weird assumptions and things on my own, and then come out in the world and you put them out, like, and you realize, oh, I was a little kooky then, and like I could have done, I'm not sure if I'm explaining it, but like you sort of create this thing in isolation, and you feel somewhat like sort of the famous story of the Japanese soldier in World War II who held his post for 30 years, and then you get out and it's like, oh, the war is over. And like, I don't know, does that make sense? Like, you sort of, I think I guess
I
I'm
think
saying like you develop something in a vacuum, and then when you test it out in the real world, you find it's unique, but it also could be very insane.
yeah, especially where it comes to drawing on lots of traditions. This was like a real shoehorning, but I did want to say that because I gave such minimal answers before, a lot of the time during Brutalist and Regenesis, I was listening to African music because you
Oh, cool.
mentioned African music. So stuff like Spider Groove or Earthling is
Oh, I love both of those songs,
really
man.
informed by those polyrhythms
Yeah.
and a whole different way of thinking about. Yeah, I, I owe so much to that listening, but like you were saying, I don't know if I truly understand what's going on. It's a very intuitive grappling with all those idioms. And
Yeah.
you mentioned cultural appropriation. It's funny because I don't know how I got this, but I get to sometimes do this lecturing thing, and I asked a question, and there was just this awful silence. No one, because we had to talk about the Brian Eno album with my life in a bush of ghosts,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
I
favorite.
like that one, but I know that was a big talking point in all the articles at the time,
Yeah.
and
Well, I
also
don't.
people
It's interesting.
essay.
At the time, I don't remember if that was if I'd have to go back and look at like anything that came out then, but was really that was a discussion that it was like cultural appropriation and
It did come up. I'm pretty sure of that because I
I'm
found
sure it
various
did.
articles. And, um, I wasn't saying there was a right or wrong answer when I asked, but obviously it's not an easy thing for
Wait, what, I'm
young
sorry.
people.
What was the question that you asked her?
I read a quote from I can't remember the exact
Oh,
quote,
okay.
but from a review, and then asked them what they thought of it, which was that accusation.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're doing it with great respect and wonder, and
Yeah.
um,
It's funny. I don't, uh, and I don't want to. I'm aware of my whiteness and my white privilege and my
yeah, I
age.
ruined everything by the way. Sorry
No,
to
no,
ruin
no, 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 you
it.
didn't. No, no, not because I'm gonna say the thing, and this will get me canceled. No, um, I totally get that, and I totally understand. And yes, there's definitely cultural appropriation going on. And like from a young age, I'll say like not like virtue signaling, but like from a young age, I was like, wait, why do the missionaries go in and force them to like Catholic? Like, didn't they have their own thing like going like that stuff? Like, how do they keep their own culture? But you're right. I think when I hear the discussion of like cultural appropriation, like that album, for instance, and I think one thing that time perhaps plays a factor in is we are now in an age where everybody has the sum total of the universe in their pocket, on
Yeah,
their phone, and then the knowledge, almost all human knowledge. Back then, and yes, it was still in a time where it was common to see blackface. It was common to see like very racist tropes and stereotypes, anywhere in conventional media and stuff. But at the same time, there was like people like yeah, like Brian Eno and folks like that, like who are hearing stuff like Fela in the '70s that like you know even in like the late '80s when I started to be aware of music from other countries, you would still see these tapes and be like, what is this? Who is Fela Anacalapo Ransom, and like what does this mean, and why are all the women standing on barbed wire on the album? Like there's cultural appropriation, yes, where there's like someone doing a terrible accent and making fun of someone from another race and culture, and then there's like just someone loving like the music of this place. And so it's like I get it, because like I'm never going to be mistaken for an Ethiopian in my life, but I love that music. Or like lately I've been blaring, I listen to a lot of mariachi music. I know we shared some stuff on Mastodon, but I love it. It's so fun. It's upbeat. Like you can't be sad listening to even their tear jerkers. It's like upbeat, but it's like it takes you to a total place. And like like you know, am I saying like, oh, I'm going to start a white mariachi band? No, but like that also mariachi will show up in my music,
yeah,
somewhere,
it's bound to.
or like country, like the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack. Like that was a huge album for a lot of country and folk musicians, and acts. But for me too, like I would listen. There was so many things in it where I was just oh, listen to that reverb on that banjo. Like, oh, try and rebuild that in like a Nord modular or something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
An interesting appraisal of it, and like Debussy heard gamelan music, and
uh-huh.
that inspired a whole host of
Yeah.
compositions. That might be wrong to say a whole host, but it certainly led to a new
Oh
direction.
yeah.
That's one thing. And then there's Deep Forest, who I listened to as a kid, and
Yep.
not I liked it then, but sometimes they would just entirely rip the top line off a folk
Oh
tune
yeah.
and add 4/4. And I'm not making any absolute judgments, but we have to get detailed. Like there's a world of
Yeah.
difference between translating across mediums like convection,
Hmm.
moving from one substrate to another, and
Yeah.
it re-emerging in your own inspired, as in you're inspired by the source.
Yeah.
There's that, and then there's ripping people off and everything in
Yeah.
between. So
It's the ripping people off. Like like yeah. The American music industry is built on the backs. I mean, this is my true belief is like the greatest American export ever was the music of the African diaspora and the that came from Africans being enslaved here. Um, and 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 a lot of what a lot of the cultural appropriation stuff is white man taking money from people of color to make the music. But on the same note, we know a lot more about blues music, and this is something I love about the cultural exchange that happens between the U.S. and pretty much every country, but especially the U.K. We a lot of um, a lot of the knowledge we have of blues music is solely because black Army and Air Force and naval officers were over there stationed in the UK and played it, and folks over there heard it, and then you got people like Jimmy Page and Robert Plant and Jeff Beck and hearing blues and turning around and then sending their interpretation of it over to the states, and then you have that interplay. I mean, it kills me that house music and Detroit techno had to be taught to us by people in England because we weren't hearing it. White people weren't hearing it because it was very much like in its own like um, you know a microcosm because a lot of white folks didn't go to where those clubs were. I wrote down gamelan because you mentioned it because I got to tell you I love gamelan. It's the
oh
most
yeah,
it is the most otherworldly music that's like next to like Glenn Velez, like the percussionist, otherworldly music made without electronics. Like it's just astounding. And the first time my
and
wife she
yeah.
played me some on a tape and I started screaming and she ran in the room. She's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "It's not fucking doing what I want it to, man. It's not going the same places, man." And then over time I came to realize like, yeah, how different the whole approach to like tone and rhythm and whatever is there. Um, I am not a big fan of the Grateful Dead. However, I respect their space in the pantheon of music because they are responsible for a lot of amazing things that us electronic musicians value as much as others. Um, their drummer Mickey Hart was really um, big on looking at he was open to like other forms of music and other cultures and stuff. And he heard a recording of gamelan music and was like, "Holy shit! I got to go to Bali to record this." And he went over to scout for musicians, and he's like, "Hey, what's the best recording you think of um, of your music?" And they said, "Oh, well, it's this." And they handed him a CD, and it was one of his. I think it was Planet Drum, which is a compilation
Oh,
of drumming from all over the world. And it was a recording. I'm not sure it was he made or it was a recording that was like very old and he found and put on here. And so he's like, oh my God, we got to re-record you. And then he put out a really beautiful 3 CD set of this. And the story is amazing. He goes over there and they had to find a way to record, a place to record them. Also, it's, you're obviously familiar with the weather in Asia. It was extremely humid and
Yeah,
hot
it
all the
gets
time. So
it's
they,
intense.
yeah, like I can't imagine. I've been to Mexico in October, and that was enough. Like if someone had thrown my luggage at me in the plane, it would have felt the same way as like the blast of hot air. But anyway, he had to record them in a gymnasium with the fans off, and then they had to rearrange the group because to record it, you wouldn't, like, I guess, that you wouldn't hear the gongs if they were next to the mallets. But it was really fascinating, the whole process of recording. But like, that's, I mean, in a way, it's textbook cultural appropriation. But on the other hand, like, this is a guy who is responsible for bringing one of the oldest and most, intricate forms of music to the rest of the world by his
Mhm.
CD. You know,
Yeah,
so yeah, it's like if someone's putting on blackface or a shitty wig and making their eyes squint, like that's fucked, obviously. But like, I mean, I just think of like all the white blues musicians who, like, someone like BB King or Buddy Guy, or like, they're the real deal. Like, does that make sense? Like, I get a little
yeah,
defensive, obviously, because I understand, like, totally. Like, people don't want to see their culture abused, but on the other hand, like, human beings as a whole, we are at our most beautiful and most uh, strongest, even like genetically as well as like culturally, when we're open to other cultures and picking that and mixing, and blending like that.
yeah. And you can find great affirmation for your instincts and intuitions. You realize they existed a long time ago, and like I'm not going to pretend it's in the same way because that would be what's that word where you read
Retroact, no, retro future, retroactive.
It's where you read the past with the future, with the present.
Oh, yeah,
It's a
it's like,
good word, but I can't remember its
is it
name.
anachronism?
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
There's another one like that, but that's pretty much what I was after. And maybe that was the word. Anyway, I'm not pretending it's in the same way, but
Uh-huh.
the way different peoples have considered noise as part of music, or don't even have a word for music
Yeah.
in many cultures, because music's just intertwined with ritual or with
Right.
life events. By the way, you said a whole bunch of great stuff there. I think you're a lot more informed than I am on like blues history, and so it's really interesting to hear. That's why I didn't comment. I have these huge holes in my.
I do too, man. It's amazing. It's just I've realized something that, like, I mean, sometimes I think I've said before, like, I think my own taste is very pedestrian and not at all.
Mm.
Which, like, I've had friends literally, like my good friend Jay is like, Psh, like, what are you talking about? Like, no one's listening to this stuff and this stuff together and think they work. Like, Ernest Tubbs and then Merzbow or something. Um, but I forgot what I was saying. Like, but like I've really, I was a really horrible musical bigot for a long time, and I don't mean like I was racist, but I was just like, I like what I like, I know what I like, and there's nothing on either side. And
Mm.
then when I started to realize that, like, my heroes were listening to, like, when people started mentioning, like, oh, like, well, Skinny Puppy listen to a lot of Cabaret Voltaire. Okay, a lot of Cabaret Voltaire. I start listening. And then, oh, they started listening to a lot of Can. Then I listened to Can. And you find those things, and I have a great deep love of musical lore and like studio lore, and yet what I find fascinating is, like, yeah, I know a bit about the blues and that stuff, and like I said, the interchange of, like, how um, American music influenced British music, and then how British music influenced American, like, back and forth. like I love that interplay, but it's just always, I think it's been an interest in just, I'm always amazed when I find something that I've never heard before at this
Yeah,
late date
that's it.
because
When your ears tweaks, and when you
yeah,
hear frequency combinations that you're not accustomed to, it's a really
yeah,
beautiful thing. It rewires you somewhat, and
yeah. Oh yeah, no, it totally doesn't. Yeah, that, and I'm, I think as I get older too, I'm really adamant about that because I want to really keep my, I want to keep my brain agile, but I want to keep hearing new things. And I'm very aware that as much as I love, like, you know, synth pop from the 80s and Flock of Seagulls and Depeche Mode and Ultravox, like that there's so much beautiful stuff out there that you just really want to keep listening, and new and old stuff.
exactly.
A friend of mine a few years ago was like, I was in a rut, and he's like, why don't you just listen to some more, start listening to some like different music. And I went haywire. I stopped listening to music for like literally 2 or 3. Or I stopped playing music for 2 or 3 months, which is way out of league for me. And I started to listen to all this different stuff, and I had a whole new addition to my palette, which was
Yeah,
really
that's
incredible.
glorious.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the few times where I'll say, you know what, yeah, Spotify's algorithm, they're terrible for artists, but they really taught me about a lot of new artists. But like,
The 20-year-olds, they're so clued up. Like people in
yeah.
their mid-20s,
Oh,
21,
this,
20,
yes, sorry, yes,
I
exactly.
love that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was going to say that. I talked to, a year or two ago, I talked to Mal from Cabaret Voltaire, and he teaches at Brighton University, I think.
Mhm.
And he was talking about his program, which is, he lectures on the arts and stuff, and he's written about cultural stuff like techno and the origin like techno and like political movements and stuff. But he was talking about his students and how different, kids who are like in their 20s listen to music versus to how we do. And you're in between those ages, for 20-year-olds and me. And I wonder how different it is, because his thing that he said, which I think was fascinating, was he said, um, they're they have this fascinating breadth of their knowledge,
Yeah.
but interesting gaps too, that they got. You can almost see how it was they arrived at it, like your knowledge would be, like, well, they know a lot about Led Zeppelin, but not so much about David Bowie, or something like that, because
Yeah.
just of how the internet works and how, about learning about music. Like, I mean, does that make sense? Like,
It
you
makes
know,
complete sense. And
what's your
again, it's just
experience
my
like?
anecdotal experience, but as patchy as their knowledge is, I haven't found as much open-mindedness as now with people that in that age group.
Interesting.
And they defy everything we were talking about before. I'm thinking of I can picture a whole bunch of young people who don't listen to the kind of music we make, but if I send it to them, and they're honest, they're not just being nice, they'll tell you if they hate something. They're, they're, they're dead into it. It may be from a completely different angle, but
Yeah.
I think we have reason to be encouraged. That's the good side of.
Yeah, I'm not someone who poo-poos the younger generations, because I think I'm old enough to have heard not only my generation get poo-pooed, but like people before me. And I'm like,
Right.
they're probably going to turn out okay. I mean, human beings have been doing this for, millennia, and we've gotten this far. Hopefully we get beyond it. But yeah, like it was just, I mean, like you said, like my daughter and her boyfriend's a fantastic musician, amazing guitar player, and he's doing a lot of electronic stuff now that's really fascinating. And it's so interesting just to talk about music, and yeah, like just where the gaps are. And the gaps aren't that they have, they're not bad, they're not because they're dumb or closed minded. It's just sort of like how kind of they learn about it. Like, and I
Exactly.
realize like my learning about something is like I'm very procedural in a way. Like I'll go through like the history of hip hop. Like, yeah, like Ryan, my daughter's boyfriend, was asking me about, like, we were talking. He was talking about, how do I make this song better? And I said, I'm going to give you homework. He's like, oh, it's like, no, it's fun. Listen, listen to the Humpty Dance by Digital Underground, and just listen to how it's put together. Listen to the production and the arrangement. notice how there's only a few elements, like, you know, the beat, a keyboard doing the bass, and some samples, but listen to how they're put together and why that makes it an amazing song.
Mm.
And and you know, like, I'll see that, but I realized, but he was like, okay, yeah, but then he's like, you know, he listens to a lot of modern, you know, like trap music, and that's a
Oh yeah.
whole different ball game and type of attention. But I just, yeah, I hear you. I think where you say there is sort of like they can get like electronic music because of their age and because of what's come sort of already come before, and it's more, you know, like you hear drum and bass in, like, you know, Vimto and, you know, Lucasade commercials or something, you know. Here, not so much. Well, no, there was a couple of cool songs that, like the Otecker song, ended up in like one of the VW ads or something.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
cool.
I think they had some. But yeah, but like I forget what I was going with. But yeah, I'm not worried about the kids. You know, the kids are going to be okay. Here's what I was going to ask you, and I realize we've been talking for a very long time.
How long have we been talking? It's pretty
I think
fun.
6 7 days probably.
uh,
Um, no, but the dog has probably soiled at least one carpet. Um, no, I was going to say, what's what are you, two parts? Like, do you have any future releases or anything, stuff you can talk about, and or sort of, is there anything you want to sort of like, um,
the
yeah,
balloons.
you're getting the balloons. It's to wind it up, Terhune. No, but like, what is there something you want to try, like doing musically, or you know, or like, what are you interested in? Like, what are you going like? What's next for Robert? If that's not too
So
vague.
kind of you to ask questions and to be interested. I'm sorry I didn't ask you any.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm not very good at questions,
That's all right.
but
You're excellent at answering them, and I'm excellent. I'm excellent at filling up all the empty space in between. So it's perfect.
it's very enjoyable. I would really, it's a theme that keeps popping up. I would really love to do an intelligent, uh, yeah, a piece that utilizes the full orchestra and all the powers of DSP. And
Mhm.
this sounds very high and mighty, but I think it'd be so powerful to utilize all these forces. And so far, maybe someone can recommend something I haven't heard yet, but I'm yet to hear something that truly satisfies what both worlds are capable of. And I'm not saying I'm the guy for the job, but I would love to try that one day. It obviously costs a lot of money, and that's the problem. But
Yeah. Two things. I don't know if you've listened to. You might. Balloons again. Um, I don't know how much Nils Fram music you're aware of.
yeah, I know him,
Yeah,
and
he's
I do.
interesting. Yeah, he said some stuff that there was one thing he said where I was like, well, this guy's an asshole. But then I realized, oh, it's just my, you know, bias. But he's interesting. Also, Pantha du Prince um, did this great. He's like, I think from Austria or something, but he did this great album where he worked with a traditional bell choir in Norway.
Mm.
And you got to see the. I'll find the video. You can find it for yourself. But it's a really interesting mixture of orchestral, and that's not a full orchestra like you're talking about, but orchestral stuff, and you know, electronics and digital signal processing. Um, but there you go. Your proper size. You're back again. But so sorry. So those two I mentioned. What? But continue with what you're saying.
Yeah, there are people who have straddled those worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's hard to explain it without getting specific or actually making the stuff. But as an example, when I did my album launch in 2008, I really wanted to get a bunch of throat singers and trumpeters. Of course, it didn't happen. It ended up being me on an MPC and Nord League 3 and a drummer and another musician, which I'm very thankful they were good. But
Yeah.
something about those traditions and their raw, visceral. Because you know, a lot of the time we talk about music in terms of certain emotions, and I don't know about you, but I can't really relate to them. That's why, in terms of the function of music, at least, I relate much more to folk traditions and ancient music, which is
Yeah.
connected with um, religious belief or transcribing a landscape, as in the case of the Aboriginals, or something a lot
Yeah.
more to do with looking outwards and the cosmos and
Right.
those kinds of feelings. And so it'd be a dream to draw the two worlds together,
Yeah.
both sonically and in other ways.
Those are always, you said, yeah, some people have done that, but like, there's always room for more of it because everyone's going to have a different interpretation. They're going to absorb that stuff differently, and they're also going to express that differently. So you're going to express it very differently than, someone else who has done it before.
Exactly. I heard an album of Mongolian throat singing with electronics, and it was just like some house beats with them
Yeah.
doing their thing on. And I don't know. I don't mean to be rude, but it wasn't what I had in
No,
mind.
yeah, no, there's a lot
There's
of, I
better
mean,
than that. There
it's
is better
interesting
than
because the quote unquote, the world music explosion that happened in the late 80s and early 90s, you got a lot of that stuff, like, like, what was that thing? Enigma, the one where they were setting Gregorian chants to like the beat, Dominus, and it's like reverb.
that. That's a great
And,
impression.
but it's like it's so it really is. It's like paint by numbers, and it's really easy. Like, I'll mention Moby.
Oh
Moby,
yeah. I
Moby's
was going to
album.
ask about your life history,
Oh,
and that was
I won't go on him. I will say this. I know Moby's controversial. I know why. He said some dumb shit. I've texted him about some dumb shit. I don't think he deserves quite all the shit he's gotten, but he does deserve a lot of it. But he's done some amazing stuff. Um, his song "Mobility," which was like one of his early singles, I really love, and some of his ambient albums are really cool. But he did that album where he sampled a lot of like either spirituals or like
play. Yeah,
work
on
work
play.
work songs. Yeah, playing people like it was like revolutionary. And it was because a lot of people hadn't heard that stuff. What's interesting is around the same time there were a couple others doing that, and there's Spaceheads is this group I love. It's the trumpet player from the band James, and then I think either their drummer or another drummer, and the guy plays like he plays a trumpet through like a bunch of effects, and the drummer just plays along with him. But they did the same thing where they were sampling like work songs, and they came up with a totally different sound and a totally different approach than Moby did.
Mm.
Like, like it was the second album or something. They're like it was like these. You can hear like these prisoners from like the Angola prison, like and you can hear the slam of the hammer on the rocks. And then but in the Spacehead stuff, they're working these weird ass loops around it, and like the drummer's doing like a very sort of militaristic, drum and fife beat, but it was crazy. But like, so they would do that, but then Moby does his thing, and their two are totally cool. And you know, I think people give Moby a lot of shit because he made money. Sure, he said dumb shit, but he made money and he did it well at doing what he did. But like, does that make sense? Like like I think we were talking about like the cultural appropriation and what how stuff is done,
Yeah,
or that
I
there's
remember.
there's room for more of it. I think of
I
people
think
using
so.
different
I think to
sources.
get more, there's room to be more granular with it, and
Yeah.
actually, an example, just because I was listening to it the other day, to my shame, I can't pronounce their name, but the group that did the Akira soundtrack.
Les Vox de Bulgaire. The is that?
Oh no, they're cool as well. But
Oh no,
this
who was
is
it?
Inio. I can write it, but I can't. I've never spoke. I don't talk to enough humans, Charles. That's my problem.
I don't either. So this is
Never
why
had
I'm
to
all
say
like,
their name.
yeah. Well, no, what? How do you spell Wiz?
They're a Japanese collective. I can type it out.
Okay.
But there's an example for me of world collision, like multiple worlds,
Yeah.
nuclear reaction in the most beautiful and convincing way.
Yeah.
And they're popular. Lots of people love that soundtrack. So it's evidence that there's openness. It just needs to be put on display.
Yeah.
And
A lot of people
I
don't
hear
know
you,
what
though.
they like until you put it in front of them too. I mean, there's really. So they just don't know, and it's like, oh, this is techno. I like this. It's like, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, as long as you frame it nicely for them, like, the film sure helps. You're right. It
Yeah.
helps, and you've got such a masterpiece of.
Yeah.
I say that I tried to watch it with my father-in-law, and you know, when you watch a film, you sanitize it in your memory, and he's
Yes.
watching Akira with me, and he's like, and it gets to the bit where the motorbike gang is doing stuff to the girlfriend. I can't
You're
remember the
fine.
actress's name. He's like, what are you into?
Yeah.
I only remember the cute bits.
I let you marry my daughter? Like,
Yeah, I think I just turned it off actually, but
yeah.
still, it's a popular film.
Yeah. I
And
think, it's something, when you mention that, the stuff about a full orchestra, it's something that reminded me of when our friend came over. He was a cellist to play. He's going to play for our wedding, and he played the Bach cello, the very famous cello piece, which I swear to God, nobody was playing at their wedding until we started doing it. Now every fucking but anyway, but something that struck me was sitting in a room with someone playing an acoustic instrument, and how goddamn loud a cello could be, even beautifully played like that, but how much air an acoustic instrument moves when you're right there with it. And I don't think a lot of people don't quite get that, but something about, yes, when you said that, it's like, oh, something about the orchestral, and then moving things into, oh yes, Henry, soon, I promise, and then bringing the electronic in it so that it's, arriving at that in some way. If that makes sense, I don't have it, but I'm like, oh, how can we build that? Like, get that sense of the bigness of acoustic instruments. Yes, I know, Henry. Stop. And electronics at the same time. I'm afraid my master is telling me I may have to go.
is it time up?
Exactly.
Should we do some final words? Is that super cool?
Yeah, it's
Actually,
always.
why don't you say some final words
for us?
and maybe on your, because it's fun to. I'm terribly bad at telling people how you can put music out. I'm trying to get better. So, let's do the opposite for a moment. Tell us about your two albums and what they mean to you. And
oh, sure. Well, like, so Overworld is, to me, yeah, it's really like it's about I think it's about it's about it's about struggle. It's about one's personal struggle, sort of accepting and dealing with the world, and through that music. There's a sequence to it of where it's there's the 5 stages of grief or whatever, if you will, but it takes you from one place to another. I'm trying to. It's interesting because I'm trying to portray an experience for people, but at the same time not necessarily hand feed it to them, because I don't think you can. But it's like you said, you present this thing in your what's the word, and they're going to filter it however they do. Um, and Overworld is Overworld's. It's interesting. Overworld is kind of, it's one of my reactions to, like, the reality of the world I live in. Is like, I got to be part of it, but I don't have to necessarily like it, and kind of, what am I doing to work with it? And then, yeah, come here, dog. You got to hear the rest. You got to hear Daddy talk a little longer. And then, All Labyrinth and No Minotaur. It's funny. It probably won't be obvious. Like that title. It's from the Nancy and Sluggo cartoon, the comic, like I said, and it's the punchline to a comic. But the thing is, I can't find it anywhere, and it's pissing me off. So I know I've seen it, but the idea with that is sort of that there's a lot of like, sort of, there's a monster and impending doom, but you're not finding it. It's like always around the corner. So it's a little bit like the album's a little bit sort of like, steeling oneself to the perils of the world, which sort of how I look, at going out in the world. Because, like you said, you don't talk much to people. I really don't talk much to people. Um, but and kind of, and it's really how it's a bit how I sort of take in. It's sort of how I take in the world, but also at the same time, the songs are each sort of an expression of a particular world or phenomena or scene. The title may or may not be relevant. It may be something that is like understandable, but it may also be a weird collection of words. That's something I'll say this. I don't know if Sean, if you're going to watch this, probably not. I'll miss when they do their live albums. I will miss their song titles because they always had such amazing, enigmatic song titles that
Really are cool.
people will be writing scholarly treatises about these for centuries. Um, but yeah, that's what these two really are about. Is just that ever growing as a musician and learning how to use what metabolizing, absorbing what I use, and then putting it forth there to, how do I employ it in my music? So, each is like, it's a bit of an album is a document of where you sort of are at a given point. And,
Yeah.
but also, I think, at the end of the day, when I'm off, departed this earth, and hopefully at least one person will cry about that, I hope someone can look at the music I've made as a whole and say, oh, it's interesting, that like they fall into these periods. Like, I do this with bands I love, like the Police, for instance. Big fan
Oh
of those,
yeah.
and they're all such consummate musicians. But it's really interesting, like looking at their albums, each as their own, all five of them separate entities, but seeing where there's sort of an overlap in some of them,
Mhm.
and like where there's different, you can see where they were progressing to get to a song on like say Synchronicity, that an idea may, a motif or something of theirs may have started with Regatta de Blanc or even the one before. So yeah, at the end of the day, I'm just making it for me. I like it and I put it out. I try not to get too wrapped up in, hopefully getting out there. I'd like, like people to buy it and make money, but really, I'm just enjoying, I'm enjoying my growth as a human through making my music, and just how I develop and how I you know, how I use, I guess, the God-given talents I have, and hopefully other folks dig it. So, does that answer your question, officer?
Mhm. That's the first time I think I would make the worst officer in the history of officers.
I might
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Answers it very well though. Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. All right. Um, yeah, the dog's got to go. So yeah, I think
Uh,
we're pushing 3 hours. But um,
wow.
to
We
everyone,
can. I have a final thought.
yeah,
A musician I really respect took his Nord 3 and a laptop on his vacation with his wife, and he said to me, she's very supportive, and
yeah,
the quote that sticks with me is, "I'll stop making music when I'm dead."
exactly. Yeah, that's when I'll
That's what
stop.
it's like. This
Yep.
crazy impetus, like your attraction to the otherness of
Mm-hmm.
creating, and yeah, we can stop when we're dead.
Yeah, yeah. That really is.
We
Yeah,
can
yeah. When I'm
go.
dead, yeah, that's when I'll be able to. Yeah, it's funny, and I think of that too a bit sometimes. Is like, will I? Is the afterlife one where I can look down at that and look at my life as an arc and see the paths and the threads and whatnot and be able to see it hopefully with some objectivity, freed of the pains and suffering of this mortal body, and just seeing, oh, I did that. But yeah, it's really like, I'll stop when I'm dead. And it's, for me, probably for you, it's half compulsion,
Mhm.
half, expression. But yeah, it's always got to get out there somehow. It's like always fighting to reach the surface and, hit the air and either oxidize or shine.
I like that.
So yeah.
I can tell you're a writer.
Oh, well,
You
I
real
yeah.
are.
That's the writing stuff is a whole nother kettle of fish. But yeah, I do love it. The book I sent you, that book, the Mantle, and a friend of mine read it. One of his comments was, um, you got your own voice perfectly. And I said, oh
Best
really?
compliment.
And it's interesting because I speak my speaking voice. And I said, really? And I realized like I'd been too afraid to put that out there for the
Mm.
longest time. And it's, yeah, there's a lot I could go on and on. There's fascinating, um, parallels in the process of, writing, words and writing music, and just that it can be ever evolving, your process, but it can be ever evolving, like what you're working on, what your focus is, and you find different themes popping up that were always there. I mean, that's something interesting for me, and as I said I was going to stop, but here I go. Like, going back and listening to songs of mine, because I've got, 40 years, I've got a bit of a, back catalog there. Hearing stuff that I did like 30 years ago and being able to tell both, like, themes that, run through my songs from then to now, but also like things I was afraid to try and do, and so it's like I both see myself, as the musician I was, but also like where I was heading,
Mm.
and it's interesting to do that. And, of course, there's a certain amount of Jesus Christ, why did I let other people hear this stuff? Like, some of it,
Mm.
but it's also like, oh, that actually turned out okay. Like, and like just seeing that the arc of the whole. So yes, it's a compulsion, but it's my compulsion and I love it. Damn it. So
The compulsion is, that's my compulsion. I love it.
yeah. Well, that's I mean, that's what it's all about. It's just a beautiful thing, music. I'm so glad I can do this and put this forth this way.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Well, our faculties allow for it. Um, and we will stop here. You got me wanting to talk about near-death experiences and what my uncle experienced upon
Oh, we're
death.
gonna have to
We'll
we're gonna have to
stop
save
right
that. We
there.
have to
I'll
save that for
stop
another one.
myself.
I know. I want to keep going, but I know at some point the dog is just gonna come and like poop.
Of course, no. Your dog's needs are.
I may have some myself, but it's all about the baby. But thank you so much for talking. I'm gonna
Thank
cut this
you.
off for everybody else, but hang on a sec.
Did anyone hang around?
I think, let's see.
I'm almost scared if they did. Oh my
I'm
god.
pretty sure